61. The Hound of the Baskervilles. When Sherlock said that Quirrell was trying to harm Harry, Hagrid was stunned. No. I mean, why do you always suspect Hogwarts professors? First Snape, now Quirrell. That's simply impossible. Before Hagrid could finish, Sherlock cut in. It is Professor Quirrell. He was the one who let the troll loose on Halloween. Hagrid stared. By the way, that night he was originally going to check the protections around the Philosopher's Stone, but he was stopped by Professor Snape. And Professor Snape, who Ron suspected, almost had his leg bitten off by your big dog, Hagrid. Now all four of them stared with wide eyes at once. What stone did you say? Snape stopped Quirrell. Rampaging Gorgons, how do you know about Fluffy? Sherlock, how many other things are you hiding from us? Sherlock sighed long enough to show they couldn't continue without a proper explanation. The Philosopher's Stone is a substance with special properties. It is the primary ingredient in the elixir of life. He turned to Harry. If you remember the chocolate frog cards, you should recall the description of Dumbledore. Sorry, I don't, Harry said, embarrassed. Sherlock shrugged. Dumbledore's well-known achievements include defeating Grindelwald in 1945, discovering 12 uses of dragon blood, and making a major success in alchemy with his partner, Nicholas Flamel. Under the stunned stares of the others, Sherlock quoted it exactly. Sherlock, how do you remember all that? Harry asked. It was hard to believe anyone could recite that from a card he'd seen months ago. I've told you before. The human brain is like a hard drive. If you choose to discard useless things, you can keep what you need. You can do it too, Sherlock said matter-of-factly. They looked at one another, at a loss for words. That sounded like something only he could do. Sherlock continued. His success in alchemy with Nicholas Flamel refers to the Philosopher's Stone. Then he turned to Hagrid. Fluffy is your hound, isn't it? Hagrid, still bewildered, answered. That's right. Fluffy's very loyal. I bought him last year from a fellow I met in a pub. That fellow seemed to be called Baskerville. Then I lent Fluffy to Dumbledore to guard the Philosopher's Stone. He stopped short. You worked that out too? Hagrid could no longer sit still. He jumped up, eyes huge, voice trembling. This first-year wizard was terrifying. Half deduction, half what Dumbledore told me, Sherlock admitted. Hagrid breathed a small relief. If Dumbledore had told him some of it, Sherlock's accomplishments seemed less supernatural. Still, a first year figuring out so much was impressive. And why did Dumbledore tell Sherlock everything? After a brief recap for Hagrid and the others, Sherlock made a concise statement. From Snape's and Quirrell's actions today, 3 things are clear. First, Quirrell is indeed a servant of Lord Voldemort. Hagrid and Ron gasped and visibly shook at the name. Harry and Hermione, who already knew the name, were unmoved. Sherlock's expression stayed calm. Second, Quirrell, or rather Voldemort, wants the Philosopher's Stone. By the way, Hagrid, he was the one who broke into Gringotts back then. Hagrid's eyes widened again. Before he could ask what Sherlock meant, Sherlock added, Harry told me you met him at the Leaky Cauldron. Third, Professor Snape is not Quirrell's match, Sherlock finished. Why do you say that? Hermione asked. Professor Snape is a potions master, and Quirrell looks so timid. Don't be fooled by appearances, Hermione. Quirrell's strength is greater than he seems. Even after Snape began counter-cursing, Quirrell was able to control the flying broom with a silent spell. It wasn't until you interfered with his casting that Snape gained the upper hand. Besides, destruction is always easier than protection. Silence fell over the cabin. It had been more than 2 months since school began. Even Harry and Hermione, raised in the Muggle world, understood the danger Voldemort posed. To hear that a Hogwarts professor had sided with him was deeply unsettling. Sherlock, you said Dumbledore already knows about this? Hermione asked suddenly. Yes. Hermione relaxed and smiled. Then it's all right. Even during the Wizarding War, Hogwarts was the safest place. Everyone says Dumbledore is the only person Voldemort fears. Relief spread through the cabin. As long as Dumbledore was at Hogwarts, Quirrell wouldn't dare be reckless. Besides, Sherlock had already discussed things with Dumbledore. With that settled, Hagrid's hut felt brighter. After the Quidditch match, Harry's fame soared. He was not only the savior of the magical world in rumor, he was now a Quidditch prodigy. The details about the Halloween troll and the flying broom, both tied to Quirrell, remained unrevealed. But Sherlock's reputation grew as well. The version circulating among students and teachers was that Sherlock had deduced from Quirrell's behavior on Halloween that Hermione had been in the girls' lavatory and had rushed to rescue her from the troll. That brave act earned him admiration from the Gryffindors and curiosity from Ravenclaw. After the duel incident, some students had already begun seeking Sherlock's help, mostly from his own house with simple questions. Now, after this, students from other houses started coming to him too. After the history of magic class on Monday morning, Sherlock saw off a group of older Ravenclaw students who had come to find him. When he came back into the classroom, his companions were staring at him with surprised expressions. "They're all my clients," he announced. Before anyone could ask, he went on. "Clients." They exchanged looks. Calling classmates clients sounded odd. "What do you mean, clients?" Ron asked. "Ever since that Halloween incident got around, people have been coming to me. I should thank Neville Longbottom, actually. The first few came because of him." "Neville?" Hermione echoed, and the others turned to look at him. Neville was absently stroking the toad he'd found earlier. Hearing Sherlock's praise, he flushed and ducked his head. "After I helped those first few," Sherlock continued, "more kept coming. These problems usually just need someone to point the way. I listen to what happened, I give them advice, and when it's sorted, they pay me." That made it clearer why he called his classmates clients. It still sounded a little far-fetched, but given Sherlock's knack for seeing things others missed, the others found it less hard to believe. "If only I were as clever as Holmes," Seamus said with envy. "Even Ravenclaw pupils come to you. That's something." Ravenclaw stood for wit and learning. That people from that house, proud, rather lofty, had gone to Sherlock for help suggested his reputation was spreading. Even Hermione, already known as Miss Know-It-All, hadn't had that kind of following. The class had ended early today, so no one hurried off to lunch. They kept talking. "Speaking of which, I just heard Mercury died yesterday," Dean said with regret. "Who?" Several faces went blank. "Freddie Mercury. Haven't you heard of him?" Seamus said, surprised at their ignorance, and explained when it didn't land. "Isn't he a famous Muggle singer?" Neville looked puzzled. "The Mercury family? No, I don't know them." Hermione hesitated, then looked at Ron. "You?" Ron spread his hands. "No." When Sherlock finally spoke, his words stunned them. "Freddie Mercury, Asian-British male singer, lead vocalist of Queen." Seamus gaped at him. "Holmes, you actually know Mercury?" In their experience, Sherlock was the sort of person who missed obvious facts, the kind who didn't care whether the Earth revolved around the sun. It seemed odd that he would know about a band. Dean, no longer bleary from class, lit up. Queen formed in London in 1971 and released their debut album shortly after. A Night at the Opera in 1975 was their commercial breakthrough. Bohemian Rhapsody won the Brit Award for Best British Single. News of the World gave us We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions, which became stadium staples from the 80s on. Their greatest hits compilation from 1981 sold over 6 million copies and is the UK's best-selling album. Just last year, they were given the Brit Award for Outstanding Contribution to Music. Everyone listened, surprised at how suddenly expansive Dean had become. Seamus, picking up the thread, added, "Queen blended glam, progressive rock, classical elements, even heavy metal. They influenced nearly every hard rock band that followed." He paused, then brightened. "Oh, now I see why Holmes knows Mercury. Dean said you play the violin." That clicked for Harry, Ron, and Neville. Sherlock's violin playing was exceptional. Queen often used classical textures in their arrangements. If Sherlock knew classical music well, it wasn't strange for him to know Queen. Hermione, who hadn't known about the violin, looked startled. "Yes, he can play," Dean confirmed. "I heard Freddie died of pneumonia brought on by AIDS, only 45. It's a tragedy." His vocal range stretched across 4 octaves, and his tone was extraordinary, Ron said, impressed. Rowing through the topic, Seamus and Dean started tapping and singing We Will Rock You, and both Harry and Hermione realized they'd heard it before. For Sherlock, Queen didn't have a permanent violinist, but their use of classical motifs made their music familiar to anyone steeped in classical performance. They decided to head back to the dormitory and ask Sherlock to play a piece. Just then, there was a knock at the doorway. A small witch with two golden braids and a slightly flushed face stepped in. "Hannah Abbott?" Hermione called in surprise. Hannah had made a strong impression during the sorting, and Hermione recognized her at once. "Granger, you're here!" Hannah brightened. Then she looked at Sherlock. "I came to find Mr. Holmes." Her eyes slid toward him in a way that left no doubt why she'd come. The others smiled and began to push out of the room. Hermione was about to follow when Hannah suddenly reached out and caught her hand. "Granger, please don't go," she begged. Hermione blinked, then glanced at Sherlock. "If you'd be willing to sit for a bit, Miss Abbott, maybe I can help," Sherlock said. Hermione had been curious about why Hannah had come for Sherlock, but it felt awkward to stay alone now that everyone else was leaving. With both Sherlock and Hannah asking, she sat down. "All right, Miss Abbott, can you tell me what's wrong?" "How did you know I had a problem?" Hannah asked, surprised. 63. The Troubles of Hannah Abbott. When you knock, knock 4 times. Ordinary people knock twice, maybe 3 times at most. Sherlock said this when Hannah Abbott asked how he knew she was troubled. "Holmes, you truly live up to your reputation." Hannah blurted, surprised. She was indeed troubled. "All right, let's start." Sherlock folded his hands under his chin and fixed his gaze on the young witch. Hannah drew a breath and began to explain. "My father works at the Ministry of Magic in records management. A few days ago, while he was sorting a batch of classified documents, he seems to have misplaced one, either through carelessness or just bad timing. Someone at the ministry seized on it and accused him of deliberately leaking information. Now he's under severe disciplinary action and could even be sent to Azkaban." Her eyes reddened and her voice trembled. Sherlock either didn't notice or noticed and didn't let it show. He opened his notepad and continued. "When your father mentioned the document, did he say anything special about it? Any detail, no matter how small, could be important." Hannah wiped at her eyes and tried to steady herself. "He said the document was locked with a special encryption enchantment. It could only be opened with a specific magical key. Where was it kept? In a safe, protected by multiple wards and locks." "Are you sure?" "Yes, that's what Father said when the ministry questioned him, but then it just appeared somewhere else." Sherlock's fingers tapped the table. He frowned, thinking. "Before the document was discovered, did anything unusual happen at the ministry? Strange comings and goings, or any fluctuations in magical activity?" Hannah closed her eyes and concentrated, trying to remember. Hermione watched, thoughtful. Sherlock watched Hannah, composed and expectant. Finally, she spoke. "Yes, a few days before the document disappeared, the protective wards in Father's office showed a brief, unexplained fluctuation. He checked everything in detail and found nothing amiss, so he figured it was nothing and didn't worry." Sherlock nodded and turned to Hermione. "If someone used magic to bypass the safe's protections and remove the document, would that leave a fluctuation in the wards?" "Absolutely," Hermione answered without hesitation, then realized the implication. "You mean—" "Wait, I have more questions," Sherlock interrupted mildly. Hermione didn't seem offended. She had long since adapted to his abrupt method. He proceeded to ask about the layout of the office, where exactly the document was stored, the safe's location, and her father's daily routines. Hannah had visited the ministry often as a child and could answer most of it, if not every tiny detail. Then she reached into her bag. "My mother managed to get me a copy of the ministry's investigation report, and this letter, Father's written account." Sherlock's expression brightened as he took them. Her father's description and the official report were far more useful than her recollections alone. He skimmed the papers while making notes and sketches in his notepad. He couldn't inspect the ministry in person, conditions didn't allow it, so he would have to work from the report. Fortunately, it was detailed enough to make plausible inferences. "I think the truth is coming into focus," he said finally. Under Hermione's and Hannah's astonished gazes, Sherlock explained. "This looks like an inside job. Someone who wanted your father's position took advantage of the opportunity to frame him." "Who?" Hannah asked, bewildered. "Light Black," Sherlock replied. Hannah stared. "Light Black? But he and my father aren't enemies." Sherlock shook his head. "Not necessarily enemies. Your father's description of the document's encryption points to an extremely rare and complex ancient enchantment. Very few people have the knowledge to crack it. Light black is one of them. The safe's protections required bypassing at least 3 different kinds of magical locks simultaneously, a task that needs both exceptional spellwork and intimate knowledge of the Ministry's security architecture. Light black oversees security in your father's area. That makes him highly suspicious. He tapped his sketch. The investigation report shows that in the week before the document vanished, Mr. Black visited your father's office more often than normal, and each visit lasted a long time. He claimed they were work discussions, but your father told investigators the conversations were mostly trivial. Those visits could have been used to observe routines and pick the right moment to act. Add to that the fact that he narrowly lost out to your father in the last promotion. There's a motive. Hannah's surprise softened into a mix of shock and relief. Hermione reached over and squeezed her hand, eyes bright as she looked at Sherlock. Holmes, that's brilliant. What do we do next? First, we need evidence to prove your father's innocence and Black's guilt, Sherlock said. The Ministry has restricted your father's movements, but your mother can still move freely. Have her and your father's colleagues at the Ministry watch Mr. Black closely. Look for attempts to erase or tamper with magical traces related to the document and for any contacts he makes with suspicious individuals. Tell Professor Sprout she can help you gain allies and keep an eye on things within the Ministry. He met Hermione's eyes. Hermione, look into ancient enchantment-breaking techniques and possible loopholes in the Ministry's security systems. Anything you find could point to how the locks were bypassed. Hermione hesitated only a moment at the enormity of the task, then nodded. Hannah, still emotional, thanked Sherlock, tears in her eyes. He offered a faint, reassuring smile. Miss Abbott, the truth cannot stay buried. If we search diligently, we'll find it. Chapter 64. The Wizarding World also has Scotland Yard. After seeing Hannah Abbott out, Hermione sat down opposite Sherlock and stared at him. What's the matter, friend? She asked. Detective Sherlock, where would I look to find vulnerabilities in the Ministry of Magic's security system? Sherlock replied, cutting to the point. Hermione's eyes widened. From the case report the Ministry just gave us, I've already found a few, he said, shaking his head gently. Huh? Hermione said in disbelief. Even if I knew where the holes were, I couldn't exploit them. This is the magical world, after all. If only I were 20. No, 17 should be enough. Her expression was a picture of stunned outrage. Sherlock made a wry noise. So you're planning a big heist at the Ministry? Hermione's mouth opened and shut. Sherlock continued without missing a beat. What surprised me was that the magical world has its own Scotland Yard. If it had been Harry or Ron, they might not have understood the reference. Hermione did. You're not impressed with Scotland Yard, are you? She said. Sherlock's expression hardened. They have initiative and the basic skills for investigations. For routine matters, they can collect evidence, interview witnesses, follow procedure, but many of their detectives think rigidly, following established models without inventive thinking or bold hypotheses. When cases get complex, their speed and response suffer. Take the home invasion before term started. They missed crucial clues and the inquiry stalled. Hermione had heard adults grumble about Scotland Yard's inefficiencies before, but she had never heard the problem laid out so precisely. Sherlock went on, even more critical. The Ministry of Magic isn't much better. This case is simple, the kind I've solved for others before. Because I can intuitively analyze things, they hand me all the evidence and expect me to point out the right path. All criminal acts have common patterns. If you know the particulars of 1,000 cases, explaining the 1,001st is hardly surprising. The difficulty here was not the lack of evidence, but an abundance of it. The relevant traces were buried beneath irrelevant noise. The Ministry's report alone contained enough to reach conclusions if someone could pick out the necessary threads and tie them together. Instead, the Ministry turned a blind eye to what lay below the surface. It often feels like they just want to close cases quickly. Sherlock's brow knit deeper. They don't seem to care who the true culprit is. I've laid out the correct line of thought, but I suspect Mrs. Abbott will still need to push to see this matter resolved. Still, since she managed to produce the Ministry's investigation report and Professor Sprout is helping, I expect a fair outcome in the end." He paused, then added, almost apologetically, "Oh, and thank you for reminding me of that young lady's name earlier." Hermione blinked. What? A little exasperation flared in her mind. If she hadn't said Hannah Abbott's name, he wouldn't have remembered her. Then again, Sherlock had said before that his mind behaved like a hard drive that didn't keep what he judged useless. Forgetting classmates' names was hardly new. Hermione suspected that, if Ron hadn't shared a dormitory with Sherlock, Sherlock might not even remember his name. Time slipped like fine sand. In the course of learning magic, helping Harry with morning exercises, teaching Hermione to fly, and assisting classmates, Sherlock had already been at Hogwarts for nearly 4 months. That meant Christmas was approaching. Like Halloween, Christmas had evolved from religious origins into a major holiday. Everything in the castle reflected it. Evergreen decorations, stockings, holly wreaths, the occasional sorting hat trimmed with tinsel. For Hogwarts pupils, Christmas mattered even more than Halloween. It marked the end of the first term and the start of a half-month holiday. Students would not return until New Year's Day. More importantly, children expected gifts, in the wizarding world delivered by owls rather than by a red-suited gentleman. The school had asked every student whether they planned to stay for the holidays. Most chose to go home. That was to be expected. In 7 years at Hogwarts, there were only 2 real chances to go home. There were exceptions, of course. "I feel sorry for those who have nowhere to go," Malfoy had sneered in potions class. "They have to go to other people's houses for Christmas because their own families don't want them." He kept taking cheap shots at Harry, though Sherlock's presence restrained him from getting too nasty. Malfoy had noticed that, if his jibes were not too severe, Sherlock tended to ignore them, and he delighted in that, pushing when he could. This time, however, even Harry didn't bother to respond. He didn't want to return to Privet Drive for Christmas, so Malfoy's taunting, supported by Crabbe and Goyle's sniggers, only made Harry more amused than hurt. Malfoy left the classroom feeling as if his blow had landed on cotton. Actually, when Professor McGonagall first came around to register list students staying for the holidays, Harry had intended to sign up. He had told Sherlock, "I won't be going home for Christmas." "No," Sherlock said calmly. "You are going home." "Home?" Harry repeated in surprise. "Sherlock, you know my family situation." "To my home," Sherlock said without a flicker of embarrassment. "My parents want to meet my friends." 65. A Cold Christmas. "Sherlock, are you inviting me for a surprise today?" Harry's eyes widened at the invitation. Staying at Hogwarts over the holidays was already a good option. Being invited to Sherlock's home for Christmas was an unexpected delight. Sherlock nodded, then glanced at Ron. "And you, Ron?" Ron blinked. "Me?" Hermione frowned. "I thought you were staying at school, Ron. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley are going to Romania to see Charlie, so you and your older brothers are supposed to be here." "How did you know that?" Ron's eyes went even wider than Harry's. "I haven't even told you lot yet." Sherlock smiled faintly. "Are you sure you want me to tell you how I knew?" Ron hedged. No, it's fine. You probably just deduced it again." Every time Sherlock described his deductions, Ron felt his own intelligence shrinking a little. If it could be avoided, he preferred not to hear the step-by-step. Besides, he'd already guessed some of it. He'd sent a letter home a few days ago, and with Sherlock's eyes, those clues were obvious. In any case, because of Sherlock's invitation, Harry and Ron would be spending Christmas at Sherlock's home. Ron couldn't keep the news to himself. He spread it around, bragging loudly. Sherlock had become something of a celebrity at school. Eccentric and blunt as he was, everyone admired his ability to deduce what someone had done the day before by looking at them. If you could ignore his sharp edges, consulting Sherlock was undeniably useful, and being invited by him to spend the holidays was something to crow about. "Sorry, I shouldn't have said that." "Achoo!" Ron muttered, his voice muffled. The cold had come on him with the advent of the holidays, and his sniffles made the apology half-hearted. "It's all right," Harry said. Sherlock's voice was calm. "Why apologize? You merely stated a fact." Ron straightened, pleased despite himself. If anyone had deserved the remark, it was Malfoy, not a Weasley. The moment could have ended there, but Snape predictably seized the chance to deduct points. "Potter, Whispering in class, Gryffindor loses 5 points. Harry had grown used to points being taken for all sorts of imagined sins. After Sherlock's explanation of Snape in the first potions lesson, Harry's view of the professor had shifted. He'd chosen to forgive. So he looked unaffected, which only made Snape more determined to be punitive. Potion class ended with Snape's sour satisfaction. As they left the dungeons, the corridor ahead was completely blocked by a giant fir tree. For a moment, everyone looked puzzled. Then they heard heavy breathing and saw 2 huge boots under the branches. One person only at Hogwarts would heave a tree into the corridor without magic: Hagrid. Ron poked his head through the branches and saw Hagrid's familiar bearded face. "Hi, Hagrid. Need a cough hand?" "No, I'm doing fine, thanks, Ron," Hagrid said. "Get out of the way. Good dogs don't block the path." Malfoy's voice cut from behind. Malfoy's taunt stung. He'd been cruel about the Weasleys before, and after Sherlock's analysis last time, Ron had been thinking some of the same defensive thoughts. Ready to charge, Ron's fists clenched, until Sherlock stepped in. "Mr. Malfoy." Sherlock's address was flat and calm. At the sound of Sherlock's gaze on him, Malfoy froze. Memories of being outsmarted by Sherlock flickered through his expression, and he went on the defensive. "Hagrid's hut's a palace compared to your lot, Weasley," he sneered. Ron's smile vanished. He was flushed with anger. "Holmes, you little—" But Malfoy wasn't foolish enough to finish. Under Sherlock's stare, he cut his taunt short and slunk away with Crabbe and Goyle close behind. Smarter to retreat than to get tangled with someone everyone knew could deduce everything about you. "You really shouldn't have let me start," Ron muttered, sniffling and stung. "I almost, a coup, could have taught him a lesson." Sherlock shook his head. "If you'd attacked him, you wouldn't have taught him anything. You'd have lost points." They all looked up as Professor Snape appeared on the stairs, as if conjured by the idea of a fight. He swept his cold glance over Ron and said icily, "You should be grateful, Weasley. If Mr. Holmes hadn't stopped you, Gryffindor would have lost points for your use of violence." "Thanks for that," Harry said, nodding to Sherlock once Snape had gone. "No, Sherlock, you have to arrange it properly so I can give that prat a real hiding," Harry added, half joking. "You're not his match," Sherlock said bluntly. Ron's face went red, and he began coughing again. "Ho, how do you cough, mean?" "Cheer up," Hagrid interrupted, giving a hearty slap to Ron's shoulder that nearly knocked the complaint out of him. "Christmas is comin'. You lot should come down to the Great Hall. Y'all'll love it. It's a proper sight." Despite the cold and the insults, the promise of Christmas and the odd, unexpected invitation lifted the mood as they made their way toward the Great Hall. 66, a thoughtful gift. Led by Hagrid, Sherlock and his 3 companions arrived at the Great Hall. Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were already putting up the Christmas decorations. Seeing them approach, Flitwick called out warmly, "Ah, the last tree's been brought in, Hagrid. Put it in that corner, please." When they finished, garlands of holly and mistletoe hung along the walls, and 12 towering Christmas trees stood around the hall. Some were draped with glittering icicles, some flickered with hundreds of candles, and others needed no extra decoration. They were beautiful enough on their own. The Great Hall looked even more magnificent than it had at Halloween. "Tomorrow is the official start of the holidays," Flitwick announced. Hagrid looked around and then turned to Harry. "I hear you're going to Sherlock's house?" he asked. "Yes, Hagrid," Harry replied. A happy smile lit his face. "Sherlock invited Ron and me." "That's wonderful," Hagrid said, genuinely pleased that Harry had found a friend. He put a hand on both Sherlock's and Harry's shoulders. "I bet this will be the best Christmas you've ever had." Harry nodded, feeling the same way, but word had gotten out that Sherlock was going home for the holidays, and an unusually large number of students had come to see him. It felt as if everyone wanted one last reading or consultation before he left. Under the circumstances, Harry, Hermione, and Ron agreed to meet in an empty classroom. "Ron, are you sure Sherlock didn't follow us?" Hermione asked. "He was stopped by that Ravenclaw girl. Probably not," Ron said. "That's good. We have to settle this before we leave school. Harry, you," Hermione began, but then noticed Harry's gaze fixed behind them. "Don't look. Sherlock won't be here for a while," she added. Okay." Harry flushed and quickly looked away. "Now, let's discuss what Christmas gift we should give Sherlock," Hermione said. Actually, we should just ask him, Ron grumbled. Two cold stares fell on him. One came from the boy who lived and the other from a top student. He wisely shut up. Recently, I used my free time to organize some information. See if there's anything you want to add, Hermione said, pushing a sheet of paper forward. Her handwriting was neat. Sherlock Holmes's scope of knowledge. 1. Literary knowledge, philosophical knowledge, none. 2. Astronomy, none, slightly improved after astronomy class. 3. Political knowledge, superficial. 4. Botany, partial, knows nothing about practical horticulture but is very familiar with poisons and dangerous magical creatures. 5. Geography, limited to practical use, can distinguish soil types at a glance, can tell which part of the grounds he's been in based on the color and texture of mud on his robes. 6. Chemistry, profound. 7. Anatomy, accurate but unsystematic. 8. Crime and dark events, very extensive, familiar with almost all horrifying events of the past century. 9. Rich practical knowledge of British law. 10. Magic, leans toward practical application, familiar with transfiguration, charms, potions, and herbology in theory and practice. History of magic, known only where it interests him. Defense against the dark arts, skill unknown. 11. Plays the violin very well, but always plays at odd hours. After reading Hermione's summary, Harry and Ron looked at each other. You know Sherlock that well? Harry asked first, genuinely impressed. He'd spent a lot of time with Sherlock, but had never been able to sum him up so neatly. Don't fuss over the details, Hermione said impatiently. Is there anything else to add? Yes, Harry said decisively. Sherlock is good with a stick and skilled in swordsmanship and boxing. Hermione and Ron stared at him in surprise. Why are you looking at me? Harry asked, a little embarrassed by their stunned expressions. Stop messing around. Tell us how you know, Ron demanded and punched Harry lightly. Hermione didn't speak, but her eyes conveyed the same demand. Harry cleared his throat. From the first day of school, I've been doing morning exercises with Sherlock every morning. Ron's eyes widened. My bloody hell, why didn't you wake me up for that? I called you on the first day and you said you couldn't get up, Harry snapped. Ron faltered, then bristled back. That doesn't mean I wouldn't go later. You, Harry started, stomping his foot in anger, but Hermione cut in. Both of you, quiet for a moment. Harry, did you find out he was good with sticks and swords during your morning exercises? That's it, Harry nodded. Actually, before school started, Sherlock said he'd studied boxing and fencing. That time in the compartment, when he handled Malfoy and the other two. Oh, so that's what he meant when he said he persuaded them, Hermione exclaimed, eyebrows shooting up. Both Harry and Ron exchanged nervous looks. This was awkward, Harry thought. He hurried to change the subject. Let's discuss the gift. Hermione snorted and brought them back to the task at hand. After some discussion, they finally decided on gifts. Harry's choice was a magical magnifying glass. Besides functioning as an ordinary magnifier, it could detect traces of magic and reveal hidden runes and fluctuations on magical objects. If Hogwarts ever had a case of stolen magic or missing creatures, the magnifying glass would help Sherlock examine scenes more carefully. The idea had come from the Hannah Abbott incident. Not long ago, Hannah had sought out and thanked Sherlock. Her father had finally been cleared of suspicion and his reputation restored, but only after a convoluted process. Even with new evidence, the Ministry of Magic had been reluctant to reopen the case. As Sherlock had predicted, they cared only about a result, not necessarily the truth. Fortunately, Abbott's mother had found someone to press the matter, and Light Black would face legal sanction. That incident had further bolstered Sherlock's reputation at Hogwarts, and more people were seeking his consultations. Ron planned to give Sherlock invisible ink and a specially made quill. The ink would show only under specific spells or reagents, perfect for hiding important notes and useful for reconnaissance. Hermione planned to give Sherlock a book. 67. Need for Speed. The book Hermione planned to give Sherlock was titled Collectible Cases of Wizarding Crime. It was a compendium of crimes in the magical world, dark arts offenses, smuggling of enchanted objects, compiled by legal scholars of magic from their research and case experience. Hermione thought it a perfect reference for Sherlock. It would help him understand the patterns of magical crime and learn investigative techniques from past cases. Having settled that, the the three of them pretended nothing had happened and walked back, only to find Sherlock still talking with that Ravenclaw girl. Hermione, in her rush earlier, had not paid much attention, but now she realized the girl was unexpectedly striking. Long black hair like a waterfall and a face that would leave an impression on anyone. When she saw Harry and the others approaching, she smiled politely and waved goodbye to Sherlock. For some reason, Harry felt his heart skip a beat. "She's lovely, don't you think, mate?" Ron nudged Harry and whistled as the girl left. Yes, I suppose," Harry managed. Hermione gave them both a snort. She had a vague idea why Harry had been flushed earlier. "Sherlock, was she consulting you as well?" "Just a trivial question," Sherlock said calmly. On the morning of the holidays, the Hogwarts Express arrived precisely on schedule. By chance, Sherlock, Harry, Hermione, and Ron shared a compartment. The sight felt strange to Sherlock. 4 months ago, he had boarded the Express and stepped into the magical world. Now, 4 months later, he and his friends from that world were taking the same train back to the Muggle world. Coming and going, it seemed like a lifetime had passed. There was nothing remarkable about the journey home. Everyone was eager to get away for New Year. Even the Malfoys, though on the same train, didn't come over to pick fights like they had at the start of term, much to Ron's disappointment. He had wanted to prove he could beat Malfoy one-on-one. That afternoon, the train pulled into Platform 9th Wars at King's Cross. A gaunt station guard stood by the barrier, letting only 2 or 3 people pass at a time, so a gaggle of students couldn't appear from the wall all at once and draw Muggle attention. On their way out, people kept greeting Sherlock and Harry cheerfully. "Bye, Holmes! See you, Potter! You're both big names!" Ron laughed. Harry shook his head. "It's not where I'm going, I assure you." Sherlock offered no opinion. He and Hermione went through first, then Harry and Ron, and in small groups they all passed through the barrier. Because Harry had not told the Dursleys he was returning to London, only Sherlock's and Hermione's parents were waiting at the exit. Sherlock immediately spotted his mother and Mrs. Granger anxiously peering into the crowd. The two fathers stood a little behind them, deep in conversation. The reunion was warm. "These two must be Harry and Ron, right?" Mrs. Holmes exclaimed, sweeping Harry and Ron into a big hug that left them a little flustered. Hermione's parents were equally welcoming. When they learned Harry and Ron would be staying at Sherlock's for the holidays, they invited them to visit the Grangers' home as well. "Dear Jane, let the children come to my place first," Mrs. Holmes said to Mrs. Granger. "My husband and I will bring them by to visit in a few days." Mrs. Granger agreed, and then pulled Sherlock aside for a few quick questions before she parted ways with Mrs. Holmes. Before she left, Hermione made a little phone call gesture to Sherlock. The two mothers exchanged knowing smiles. Mr. Granger, however, furrowed his brow. "Huh, what is that? Is that a car?" Ron pointed, wide-eyed, toward a car parked behind Mr. Holmes. It had a sleek, elegant body with clean, flowing lines. The rear was understated. The taillights formed in a distinctive shape that matched the car's overall look, stable, fashionable. In the very center of the grille, a badge showed a ship's bow and sails, and above it, the word Rover gleamed in gold. From where Ron was standing, he could see the plush dashboard and soft leather seats and could not help blurting, "That's way cooler than our broken car." Mr. Holmes, amused by Ron's astonishment, listened as Ron told the proud but improbable story. Mr. Weasley had a car too, not as polished as this one, but it could fly. Ron's voice was full of awe. He insisted the Weasley car could fly long distances like an aeroplane, which, to Mr. Holmes's delight, made it even more fascinating than any TV car he'd heard about. Ron's enthusiasm won him the passenger seat for the drive home, and he and Mr. Holmes bonded instantly over engines, panels, and improbable mechanics. They even agreed that when the Weasleys returned from Romania in the summer, Mr. Holmes must visit to see that car with his own eyes. Mrs. Holmes watched her excited husband with a fond smile. She turned to Harry, who still seemed guarded, and softened her voice. "Harry, you don't have to be so formal. Think of the place as a home." Harry froze for a moment. Did she mean he would be living in a cupboard? Then realized she didn't mean that. Mrs. Holmes was a gentle, solidly kind British woman. In her, Harry saw a reflection of his own mother. Her easy warmth and spare, practical manners slowly loosened him. They chatted a little more, and Harry relaxed, which pleased Mrs. Holmes immensely. A mother knows her child, and she had worried that Sherlock might be aloof and lonely at school, as he had been before. Distant, unsociable, the sort who drew cruelty. Instead, she had found him happy at Hogwarts, with friends beyond the one girl Hermione had told her about before term. It had been a pleasant surprise. Because of that, when she learned Harry and Ron planned to stay on at school for the holidays, she insisted Sherlock invite them to her home for New Year. During the trip, she'd noticed how much the boys trusted and admired Sherlock. To her, that was the most important thing. Whether Sherlock became a great wizard later on didn't matter as much as seeing him cared for and content. Back on King's Cross, Mrs. Holmes went off to make dinner while Sherlock led Harry and Ron up to the second floor. "Both rooms are empty," he said. "Pick whichever you like." "You mean one room each?" Harry and Ron's eyes went wide. When Sherlock told Harry and Ron to pick a lane each for the car, Ron made an exaggerated show of offense. "Oh, my dear Sherlock, I didn't know you were as rich as Hermione." If guests ever visited the Holmes household, Ron joked, they'd have to squeeze in. Sherlock ignored the jibe and said to them both, "Get to bed early after dinner tonight. We're heading to Diagon Alley first thing tomorrow." "Diagon Alley? Going to buy something?" Harry asked. "Yes. I need your help." "Sure." Harry and Ron both agreed quickly. Harry was simply thrilled at the chance to help Sherlock. Ron was happy too, figuring that anything besides borrowing money was negotiable. Sherlock's family clearly had means. Mrs. Holmes's cooking was a treat after so long on bland Muggle fare. Nothing like the holiday banquets in the Hogwarts Great Hall, but finer in its own way. Ron started off a bit restrained, but after a few bites he reverted to form, grabbing a chicken leg in each hand and eating with gusto. Harry ate more than usual as well. Mrs. Holmes watched them with eyes curved into delighted crescents. For Sherlock, tasting his mother's cooking again was a comfort he hadn't realized he needed. That night, the three young wizards slept well. The next morning, Mr. Holmes drove them to the Leaky Cauldron. The pub was dim and quiet, it being off-season, and Harry's presence caused little fuss. "As I thought," Sherlock said as they passed through the bar into the walled courtyard, looking at his father. "You were right?" Mr. Holmes smiled. He wasn't surprised Sherlock had noticed. "How did you know?" Harry asked. "That parking spot outside," Sherlock said. "It's reserved for long-term tenants." "That's simple," Ron said, doubtful. Mr. Holmes chuckled. "There are other signs as well. The pub owner treats me like a regular. Even though I can't enter Diagon Alley myself, I can learn a lot about the wizarding world through this place." "Uncle Holmes," Ron said with shining eyes, "I'm sure you and my dad would get on like a house on fire." Ron's own father worked in the Ministry's Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office. He loved everything Muggle, so he'd have plenty to talk about with Mr. Holmes. At Sherlock's instruction, Harry tapped the correct bricks with his wand, and the entrance to Diagon Alley opened. "Where to?" Sherlock asked. "Gringotts," he answered. Diagon Alley was quieter than during the school rush. On the walk to Gringotts, Sherlock explained why they were there. He wanted to exchange some Muggle money into wizarding currency using Harry and Ron's names. The annual exchange allowances were higher for children with wizarding parents than for children like Sherlock and Hermione, who were Muggle-born, so using their names made it possible to get far more galleons. Both boys were glad to help. Opportunities to do favors for Sherlock were rare. With their help, Sherlock managed to exchange enough galleons. Harry had been down to his parents' small vault before and took the arrival of gleaming coins in stride. Ron, however, had never seen so much cash in one place. He stared as if hypnotized. They left Gringotts and, almost without realizing it, followed Sherlock into Ollivander's. "Sherlock, what are we doing here?" Ron asked. "To buy a wand, of course." Ron blinked in surprise. "Is yours broken?" "No, it's yours." "Mine?" Ron pointed at himself, incredulous, before a soft voice from inside the shop interrupted. "Hello there. It's rare to see young wizards about at this hour." Ollivander emerged, his pale eyes sharpening when he saw Harry. "Mr. Potter, we meet again." "Hello," Harry said awkwardly. Sherlock nodded toward Ron. "My friend needs a new wand." Ollivander's gaze moved to Ron. "You must be a Weasley. Sraff, may I see your wand?" Ron fumbled for it, but turned to Sherlock instead. "Sherlock, what is this about?" You remember when we first met, Sherlock said. I told you a wand has to suit you. If it doesn't, your spell work suffers. Since the start of term, you've had trouble with charms. Mrs. Beth, Granger keeps correcting your pronunciation, but the real issue might be the wand itself. Let Mr. Ollivander take a look. If it is the wand, then a new one will be my Christmas present to you. Ron's eyes filled. He'd always been the overlooked one in a family of 5 successful older brothers, Bill, Charlie, Percy, and the twins, each known for something impressive before him. Expectations had been high, and standing out was hard when so many accomplishments were already taken. Among the first years, Ron hadn't distinguished himself by much. The only notable thing was that he was Harry Potter's friend, the boy who'd helped save the wizarding world. That was something, but it didn't erase the long-standing feeling of being second place. Yet here was Sherlock, offering help without patronizing, offering a wand because he'd noticed something others hadn't. Ron's chest tightened and tears threatened to spill over. 69. Dare to kill my horse, Sherlock. Ron couldn't help the sniffle that rose in his throat. He turned his head away at once. There was no way he could let Sherlock or Harry see him like this. Then he noticed Mr. Holmes, Sherlock's father, leaning in the doorway with a smile on his face as he watched. The situation felt awkward for a moment. Young man of the Weasley family, do take out your wand at once. Don't keep an old man waiting, Mr. Holmes said with a courteous air. When it came to social graces, Mr. Holmes was plainly more at ease than his son. Seeing Ron's embarrassment, he stepped in to smooth things over. Oh, yes? Good. Ron shot him a grateful look and drew his battered wand. I remember every wand I've sold, Mr. Ollivander said as he took it from him, fingers moving over the worn shaft with the tenderness of someone who keeps a ledger in his head. Ash, 12 inches, unicorn hair, originally very flexible. His expression sharpened. That would explain the sluggishness when you try to cast charms, wouldn't it? Exactly. You're absolutely right. Ron nodded hard. There hadn't been many customers lately. Encountering someone buying a wand was rare, and Mr. Ollivander relaxed and talked freely. It always seems as if the wand chooses the wizard, he said, but the wand chooses as well. Unicorn hair makes a loyal core, and ash is a loyal wood. A wand made of the two? Loyal? Ron echoed, puzzled. Loyal, Mr. Ollivander repeated firmly. In cases like this, even if the wand's new owner is a blood relative of the previous owner, it may be difficult to handle. Or rather, if you weren't the first owner's younger brother, you might not be able to manage even the simplest charm. Ron's eyes widened. So that had been the problem. Thank goodness Mr. Holmes noticed in time, Mr. Ollivander went on. Otherwise, it would have seriously held back your progress with charms. Ron's eyes prickled again, but when he looked up, Sherlock had slipped away. That was Sherlock. Quiet, precise, there was no point dwelling on it. Soon, a new wand was chosen for Ron. 14 inches, willow, with a unicorn hair core. Mr. Ollivander explained that unicorn hair gave stability, while willow favored wizards with great potential. In short, loyal. Just as Mr. Ollivander handed the packaged wand to Ron, Sherlock returned, arms full of parcels. Sherlock, what's all this? Harry asked, curious. Some materials I'll need later, Sherlock said, evasive. Harry read the answer easily enough. The time wasn't right yet. He'd been with Sherlock long enough to accept that. Ron couldn't wait to try his new wand. The levitation charm he had never managed in charms class came out smooth as silk. He was ecstatic. Even after they were back at Sherlock's house from Diagon Alley, Ron kept wanting to practice. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Magic had rules about underage spellcasting. There's no such restriction at home, Ron began. Paragraph 3 of the Reasonable Restriction of Underage Wizards Act, Sherlock recited, as if counting his possessions, states that intentionally using magic in a Muggle-inhabited area in front of Muggles is an offense. This is a Muggle neighborhood, he added. If magic is used here, the Ministry can trace it straight back to my house. Harry and Ron exchanged glances. What sort of act was this? They hadn't heard of it before, but neither doubted Sherlock. When Sherlock said something like that, it was true. That's a bit boring, Ron sighed. If only I'd brought wizard chess. No, even if I'd brought my grandfather's set. It's not like Sherlock's house has one. No, I do, Sherlock said, producing 2 sets of wizard chess from somewhere. Both Harry and Ron were astonished. When did you? I bought them today in Diagon Alley, Sherlock replied. You're amazing. Ron jumped up and practically hugged him, then immediately sat down to play Harry. Whether playing wizard chess in a muggle house violated any rule? They weren't sure, but Sherlock hadn't objected, so they took that as permission. Sherlock knew he was pushing the edge of the rules. Hogwarts only signs the trace agreements for summer holiday arrangements later. But chess, in a muggle neighborhood and without spells, was unlikely to attract the Ministry's attention. Besides, the Ministry must already know Harry was at his house. A little courtesy could be expected. They played several games. Wizard chess follows the same rules as regular chess, but the pieces are alive. When one piece captures another, it knocks it down and drags it off like a slain soldier. It felt like commanding an army, and once the new sets were on the board, Ron soon learned to make his pieces obey. Harry, by contrast, had his pieces offering non-stop commentary. Don't send me there. Didn't you see his knight? Go on. It'll be fine, even if I have to sacrifice myself. How dare you kill my knight? Already not as strong a player as Ron, Harry found his play disrupted by talkative pieces. He was driven into defense after defense and suffered a string of humiliating defeats. Armor lost, forces scattered. Fortunately, Mr. Holmes noticed the unfairness and intervened. At first, as a muggle, Mr. Holmes's commands to Harry's black pieces were met with resistance or outright questioning. But as the game went on, the unruly pieces grew obedient. By the end of a match, they were almost as compliant as Ron's white pieces, executing orders with effortless obedience and turning the tide of the game. What had been a one-sided rout became a hard-fought battle. Sherlock watched Ron and his father with no surprise. This was exactly what he had expected. He turned to Harry. We're going to 4 Private Drive in a couple of days. What? Harry whispered, glancing at Ron and Mr. Holmes, who were still absorbed in chess. Just the 2 of us? My mother will drive us there, Sherlock said. Not his father, because if he could give Mr. Holmes a chance to enjoy an afternoon playing chess with Ron, he would. Madam, you wouldn't want your husband to lose his job, would you? Privet Drive, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey, was exactly what everyone said. Quiet, ordinary, and firmly magic-free. It had been Harry's home since childhood. Sherlock lived in Kensington and Chelsea. Geographically, they were only about 20 miles apart, but they could not have been more different. Harry had agreed to go because he trusted Sherlock, then asked the obvious question. All right, but what are we going there for? Sherlock had only said he needed to confirm a few things with Harry's aunt. Then, with his typical abruptness, he changed the subject. Harry, have you thought about gifts for the professors? No, Harry was honest. He hadn't thought about it at all. He wondered if that had anything to do with the visit. The answer came the next morning. Mrs. Holmes drove them north out of London. Although Christmas hadn't quite arrived, the towns they passed were already dressed for it, lights and wreaths giving the streets a different kind of hush. When they reached Privet Drive, nothing looked altered from how Harry remembered it. He felt a cold tightening in his stomach as Sherlock signaled for him to knock. He hesitated then, because he trusted Sherlock, placed his hand against the door. A thin, fair woman opened it. Her face went white the moment she saw Harry. Why are you here? She demanded. Harry wanted to turn and run. A hand rested on his shoulder, Sherlock's hand. Sherlock gave him a quick, steadying shake of the head, then turned to the woman. Hello, Mrs. Dursley. Mrs. Holmes stepped forward and offered an elegant smile. It's a pleasure to meet you. Petunia Dursley's eyes narrowed as she regarded the new woman with suspicion. Outwardly composed, she was instantly distrustful of anyone connected with magic. Who are you? My name is Warita Holmes. My sons Sherlock and Harry are classmates at Hogwarts. I'm sorry for the sudden visit. At the mention of Hogwarts, Petunia's expression hardened into something like disgust. Before she could answer, a voice called from inside the house. What's all that racket, Petunia? Petunia muttered something about shampoo salespeople, as if that explained the intrusion. Then, leaning toward Mrs. Holmes in a low, sharp voice, she added, You're not welcome here. You'd best leave before my husband gets upset. Warita Holmes maintained her calm smile. Mrs. Dursley, Harry mentions you at school sometimes. He says you looked after him. Petunia's contempt was plain. She considered whatever the Dursleys had done for Harry the height of charity. Praise from a wizarding mother only felt like a lie. She was about to tell them off when Sherlock cut in, his voice even and cold. "Madam, you wouldn't want your husband to lose his job, would you?" Petunia's face went slack. Before she could respond, Sherlock added, "I suspect Mr. Dursley will be entertaining 2 guests for dinner tonight." The color drained from Petunia's face. "If I'm not mistaken," she whispered, "this is Mr. Dursley's biggest opportunity in years, isn't it?" Her fear was visible, raw. Sherlock did not smile. He withdrew a wand from his pocket. It was a small, clean gesture, but it had an immediate effect. Petunia screamed and clapped a hand to her mouth. A red-faced, heavy-set man thundered from an inner room. When he saw them, the veins at his temples bulged and his face went a purpling red. Sherlock, noting their alarm, adjusted his tone. "So, aren't you going to invite us in for a sit?" Warita Holmes watched him and gave a resigned little shake of her head. She had tried courtesy. Sherlock's method was more persuasive. 5 minutes later, Warita, Sherlock, and a bewildered Harry were seated in the Dursleys' living room. For Harry, it was the first time he had been treated like a guest in that house. The novelty made his stomach flutter. Uncle Vernon's face was dark. "Speak. What do you want?" Sherlock's eyes swept the family. Vernon, ruddy, heavy, almost no neck and a thick moustache. Petunia, thin, long-necked, and severe. Their son Dudley, blond and grossly overfed, his features crowded together. Harry's own smallness and green eyes set him apart. "There's no need to be so nervous," Warita said softly. She glanced at her son. Sherlock gave a subtle nod and then turned his attention back to Petunia. "I only want to ask some questions about Harry's mother," he said. "From what I've seen, Mrs. Dursley should know something." Petunia's reaction was instantaneous and fierce. "Impossible, absolutely impossible," she cried, shrill and angry. Harry spread his hands helplessly. He had asked Petunia about this before, about the magical world and about his parents, only to be stonewalled. He had hoped Sherlock might succeed where he had failed. After all, Sherlock Holmes. "It seems Madame does know quite a bit about magic," Sherlock said calmly. Mrs. Dursley's reaction was precisely what he expected. Under her nervous gaze, he added, "If that's the case, you've probably heard of a magic called legilimency." Harry stared at him. "Not cool, Sherlock. What are you trying to do?" Sherlock's manner was impeccably polite, but his words landed like ice in the Dursleys' living room. "The name should tell you what it does. It allows someone to read another's memories by force." He produced his wand and idly stroked it. "Madam, you wouldn't want me to use magic to make you cooperate, would you?" Harry felt the urge to yell. He knew Sherlock was being deliberately theatrical to extract information, but the expression, the posture, the cool, precise voice, he could only think, why is he so frighteningly good at this? Faced with that composed politeness, the Dursleys finally broke. They realized they could not treat this boy as a harmless child. Vernon, who had seen his share of important people, recognized the same kind of controlled, aristocratic bearing he had experienced in higher society. Petunia read his face and understood instantly what he was thinking. "All right," she said at last, drawing a breath. Her voice was stiff. The corner of her mouth twitched as if she were fighting down something. "Your mother, Lily." She spoke haltingly, telling them about Lily as she remembered her. Strange things seemed to follow the girl, little miracles. "She used to make withered lilies bloom," Petunia said. "Once she fell out of a tree and floated to the ground like something was holding her up." Petunia recalled the summer Lily turned 11 and, like Harry, received a letter delivered by an owl. Half an hour later, her account trailed off. Harry bowed his head, swallowed by a familiar grief. Sherlock frowned. Petunia had supplied a few useful facts. Lily had known a boy from Spinner's End long before Hogwarts, a gloomy boy in shabby clothes who later became a classmate, but with whom she had fallen out after a few years. But most of it concerned Lily before she married. According to Petunia, after Lily married James Potter, the sisters lost touch. Only 10 years ago, one morning when Petunia had opened the front door to fetch the milk, she'd found an infant Harry on the doorstep and a letter among her screams. The letter was from Dumbledore. It told her the Potters were dead. To preserve the family's normal life, she had never told Harry about magic and had told him his parents died in a car crash. "Thank you for telling us, Mrs. Dursley," Sherlock said with a small smile. "But I think you could be more forthcoming." Petunia's eyes narrowed. "I told you everything I know." "Really?" Sherlock shook his head and then said something that hit her like a blade. "You envied your sister, didn't you?" "I did not. I didn't," Petunia began, flustered and defensive. Vernon moved to his wife's side, his panic obvious. "Boy, watch your tone," he barked. Sherlock met Petunia's eyes without flinching. "You and Professor Dumbledore didn't only exchange that one letter, did you? You were in touch before Lily went to school. You wanted to be a witch yourself." Petunia started to stand, her face draining of color. Sherlock's words dragged her back to that summer of her youth, to hopes that had been politely turned aside. A letter sent decades ago had become a fresh wound. "It wasn't when Lily married that you decided to cut off the wizarding world," he continued. "It was soon after she went to Hogwarts." Harry could hardly believe it. Aunt Petunia had been in contact with Dumbledore? She had known Snape? She had all along envied her sister? The claim sounded preposterous until Sherlock said it, and the facts arranged themselves neatly in his head. "You said you wouldn't use that kind of magic on us," Vernon roared, clutching Petunia. "I don't need magic to deduce this," Sherlock replied, almost bored. "For instance, I can tell you are expecting Mr. and Mrs. Mason for dinner tonight." "Impossible," Vernon spluttered. "Absolutely impossible. Allow me." Sherlock's voice slid over the room like water. "Mrs. Dursley was in the middle of cooking when she opened the door. The dishes and drinks in the kitchen are set up for an evening meal. It'd be too late for lunch. There are 2 extra pairs of guest slippers by the door, a man's and a woman's, clean and formal, not the sort you normally use. The newspapers on the table all carry stories about one company. The owner is Mr. Mason, and several articles are annotated in pen. The dining table is laid for 5, the tablecloth fresh, plates and cutlery, and wine glasses set out as if for guests. There's a golf ball ornament on the display shelf and a golf course painting newly hung in the sitting room." Sherlock paused, letting them breathe it in. "So, you're entertaining Mr. and Mrs. Mason tonight. Mr. Mason plays golf, and you're going to try to steer the conversation toward your husband's work to close a deal." Silence fell. The Dursleys sat stunned. Mrs. Holmes looked at her son with obvious pride. Harry, suddenly puffed up with a strange swelling of pride, straightened his shoulders and shared in it. 72. How did the country become like this? Even after leaving 4 Privet Drive and sitting in the back of the car, Harry still felt as if he were dreaming. He kept clutching the photo album so tightly his knuckles ached. It was the biggest thing he had taken away from the visit. From his conversation with Mrs. Dursley, Sherlock had quickly deduced that, despite everything she said, she had kept traces of her sister's life. He had even presented the special diet pills and anti-hair loss shampoo he'd bought in Diagon Alley. Mrs. Dursley wasn't stupid. She had already given her nephew his Christmas present, photos of Lily when she was young. Amusingly, Mrs. Dursley had first brushed off Vernon's hint that Sherlock was there to sell shampoo, yet she ended up accepting it. Stranger still, the main ingredient of that anti-hair loss shampoo was the Potter family's hair growth potion. Whether that counted as a domestic export was another question entirely. Because the Dursleys were unusually civil, Sherlock had slipped Dudley 2 bags of chocolate frogs as an extra gift. Dudley grinned like a Cheshire cat, ignoring his parents' stern looks as he took them. "Sherlock, thank you. Thank you so much," Mrs. Dursley gushed. Sherlock hadn't yet said anything when Mrs. Holmes, who was driving, laughed without looking back. "Don't thank us. Harry, you and Sherlock are friends. Isn't it natural for friends to help one another?" Sherlock nodded and then pointed at the album Harry was opening. "I suggest sending this photo to Professor Snape. For him, this would be the best Christmas present." Harry turned the page. The picture showed 2 people standing close together. The young woman's hair was a mass of red curls that lay playfully on her shoulders. Her skin was pale, with a faint blush on her cheeks. Her nose was straight and neat, and the corners of her mouth lifted in a half smile, showing 2 shallow dimples. Her smile was like sunlight, warm and healing. Many had said it before. Her deep emerald green eyes were exactly like Harry's, clear and bright. The young man beside her, holding her arm, was recognizable too. Not only did his features look familiar, but his oily, seaweed-like hair made his identity plain. Harry realized then why Sherlock had asked earlier what gifts he should give the professors. He'd been waiting for this moment. Still, Harry hesitated. Is my mother really on good terms with Professor Snape? Evidently, Sherlock said confidently. I don't know why they parted ways, but he still carries deep guilt for failing to protect your mother. But is Professor Snape really not connected to Lord Voldemort? Harry asked, puzzled. When term started, I looked at him and my scar started hurting. Sherlock, who usually lounged half asleep, became suddenly alert. He rested his chin on his hands and fixed Harry with a sharp look. When you looked at Professor Snape, your scar hurt? Yes, Harry said. It burned for a moment. It went away right away, but it hurt in a way it never has before. Sherlock thought for a second and then asked slowly, Are you sure it was caused by looking at Professor Snape? Not something like at the Quidditch pitch? Yes. Wait, Sherlock, do you mean? Harry's mind jumped back to the Quidditch match. Everyone had assumed Snape was trying to jinx him off his broom, but Sherlock alone had suggested Snape had actually been protecting him. Perhaps you've forgotten, Sherlock said quietly. The person sitting next to Snape at that time was Quirrell. Harry felt the color drain from his face. As Christmas approached, the season's cheer grew. Ron had complained at first about not being taken to Privet Drive, but he was quickly distracted by new discoveries. The first was playing wizard's chess with Mr. Holmes. Mr. Holmes's skill proved impressive. He and Ron were evenly matched, in a way Ron savored far more than playing against Harry. Ron had also become fascinated by television. He found the idea that a box could show moving images of people and places and make sounds without any magic utterly enthralling. A few days later, Hermione and her parents came to the Holmeses' house. It had been almost a week since they returned from Hogwarts, and with Christmas approaching, Sherlock hadn't called Hermione even once. Finally, she couldn't wait any longer and rang him. Mrs. Holmes took the chance and invited the whole Granger family over. Mr. Granger hesitated. We agreed they would come to our house. Mrs. Granger waved it off. Don't worry about such details, dear, as long as the children are happy. Hermione, however, was not going to let Sherlock off easily. She stood with her hands on her hips and glared. Sherlock, didn't we agree you'd call? Sherlock looked suitably chastised. Harry and Ron nearby couldn't help but chuckle. It was a rare thing to see Sherlock in trouble. And you too, Hermione scolded them. Harry, why didn't you remind Sherlock to call? Ron, if you couldn't call, you could have sent an owl. Harry and Ron both reddened. Mrs. Holmes and Mrs. Granger smiled indulgently. Youth is a wonderful thing, Mrs. Holmes said. Indeed, Mrs. Granger agreed. Meanwhile, Mr. Granger stood in front of the television with Mr. Holmes watching the news. What a mess, Mr. Granger muttered, a rare sharpness in his voice. If this continues, our country will be a laughingstock on the international stage. Mr. Holmes watched the bald commentator on the screen and shook his head. Damn it, how did the country become like this? He said. Mr. Holmes then looked at Mr. Granger and after a few moments offered a cautious suggestion. You might consider taking out a small loan in rubles and converting it into pounds, he said. I wouldn't make the amount large. Mr. Granger started at the idea. You think? It's only a possibility, Mr. Holmes cautioned. After a short discussion, the Grangers decided to follow Mr. Holmes's advice and go to the bank the next day. The two families had grown close, and Mr. Granger trusted Mr. Holmes's judgment. Sherlock observed all this quietly. Politics, he thought, was distant business for an 11-year-old, and not something he should be preoccupied with. But now, knowing magic existed in the world, he felt an unfamiliar unease. If this giant truly fell, what would happen to the magical world? 73. Dare to Speak Out. It will be available on February 1st, a Saturday, and the 4th day of the Lunar New Year. As a new author, this is a really exciting moment. As I mentioned in the author's notes for the previous chapters, everyone's been busy with New Year celebrations, so readership has been low. I originally thought I might quietly release the book while no one was paying attention, but that would have been self-deception, so I gave up the idea. If I'm going to speak, I might as well speak up properly. Back to the main point. When my last Three Kingdoms novel ended, I actually had two directions in mind for a new book. One was to continue with historical themes, a story called Ado Transmigrates to Emperor Gaozong of Song. The other is the book you're reading now, Holmes in Hogwarts. Honestly, I was leaning toward the first, since it continues the historical thread and features Otto, which would likely keep a lot of my old readers. But plans change. In the first half of last year, my workplace sent me abroad, and I couldn't write for a long time. My schedule was completely disrupted. After thinking it over, I decided to leave history behind and switch to fantasy. The genre jump was large, but going abroad gave me a lot of material to draw on. After returning, catching up on backlog, and waiting a while, I finally began preparing for the new book. As a part-time writer, it's really hard to consistently produce 5,000 or 6,000 words every day, so the preparation had to be thorough. That's why the book didn't go on shelves until the end of last year. I wonder how many readers from my old books are still around. As a new author, I know well that pre-launch and post-launch performance are different things. So, it's the new year, you've come this far, and if you like the book, please subscribe. I also know some readers only like to read for free and are masters of tricks like, definitely next time. It's not that they don't have money, they just prefer that method. I could play the sympathy card now, but I can't bring myself to. As I said in previous author's notes, I have a steady job. I married before 30, my husband and I get along well, my parents are healthy, and my younger sister got into a local university and could come home every week. Time passed. I now have a daughter. My sister graduated and found a local job but still comes home weekly. Life has its annoyances, but overall I'm content and not miserable at all. Regrettably, this book didn't receive Sanjiang's strong recommendation. Ultimately, it was just too weak. I'll still do my best to tell a good story and keep improving. Readers of my previous work know my biggest strength is perseverance. Once I start a book, I will finish it, no matter how poor the results. A book with 10 initial subscriptions reached 500,000 words. One with 20 initial subscriptions reached 1 million, 50 initial subscriptions to 2 million, 250 to 2.4 million. It shows a tenacious spirit. So don't worry that I'll give up halfway. It's just that conceiving this book was much harder than the previous ones, and it cost me a lot of hair. Rules for bonus chapters after release, same as last book. 1. For every 500 increase in average subscriptions, 1 extra chapter. 2. For every additional 1,000 monthly votes above 1,000, 1 extra chapter. 3. 1 extra chapter for an alliance leader. Unlikely, but a person must dream. Otherwise, what's the difference from being a salted fish? In addition to bonus chapters, daily updates will be 2,000 words more than before the book launched. Chapters will be about 3,000 words each, still updating at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Thanks to the friends who recommended chapters. I shamelessly take this chance to promote a few titles. Turbulence 1979 by Ni Baifo. One of the female leads is the Queen of the Women's Kingdom. A harem novel from a veteran urban entertainment author. Large in quantity, satisfying, solid. What's Wrong with One More Rich Person? By Yu Shui, an urban fiction author with the polish of an old hand. Steady updates, plentiful, reliable quality. A great era novel set in 2008. Warring States Survival Guide by Heidi Menbouge. This author claims only 500 fans. Shameless, but has a unique style. Don't miss it if you like this genre. Mythical Three Kingdoms by Fentu Huangcao. Caution advised, it's already at 4,700 chapters, and the author may abandon it, but the content is highly recommended. Rebirth 2010, Unrivaled Territory by Not an Old Dog, a veteran who switched from xianxia to urban novels. From the title, you can tell it's another era novel with stable, plentiful updates. Burning the World from Butterfly Lovers by Xiao Heimao. Despite the title, the protagonist is Xushuan. It mixes folk myth and supernatural tales very well. Others Tame Beasts, You Tame Beast Girls by Qingnian Abing. A hot-blooded youth fantasy about taming beasts in an original world. Worth a look if you like the genre. Idealistic Martial Arts starts with Hypnosis by Daini Ru Keng. High martial fantasy, well-built world, strong writing, and a dominant protagonist fighting through hypnosis-based powers. What to Do When You Transmigrate into a Fantasy World as a Serf by Mo Pingley de Parker. An old author under a new pen name, won't let me reveal his identity. Word count is a bit low, but worth checking out. Book of Troubled Times by Ji Cha. The book has concluded and is excellent. My last Three Kingdoms novel got its start and ideas from him. Sadly, I didn't write it as well as I could have. Dragon by Ludon Pashuai. No major flaws aside from somewhat irregular updates. And please, readers recommended by Erden, don't scold me. How could my skills as a new author compare to a great god? Then Let Them Offer Their Loyalty by Chang Shi, a veteran light novel author. Full of transmigration, apocalypse, evil energy, and superpowers. Rich but not chaotic, with stable updates. Seeking good fortune and avoiding misfortune. Starting from the Celestial Master's Mansion by Baiwei Feiying, a veteran fantasy author known for subverting tropes, a humorous style, well-developed characters, and a large, satisfying volume. Finally, Happy Chinese New Year again, and all the best. 74, December 25th, 1991. Hermione was furious. She had been annoyed already that Sherlock hadn't contacted her over the holidays. Hearing that he'd actually taken Harry to Privet Drive without inviting her made her positively livid. Why hadn't he asked her to come? It was too late to do anything about it now. In the end, at Ron's insistent request, Sherlock agreed to play several of their favorite violin pieces as a sort of apology. Ron had clearly seized an opportunity. Sherlock could play beautifully, even pieces of great difficulty. The problem was that he didn't play them like anyone else. During Ron's stay at 221B, he'd sat in his chair every evening, laid the violin flat across his lap, closed his eyes, and played as if to himself. The sound could be high and melancholy, oddly cheerful at times, and at other moments like the noise of someone sawing timber. Ron had endured more than one such evening. Mr. Holmes and Mrs. Holmes seemed entirely used to it. Harry didn't so much as twitch. Ron could only retreat to his bedroom and shut the door tight. Sherlock's violin penetrated even that barrier. It was, to Ron, a form of torture. With Hermione backing him up vociferously, Ron finally managed to demand compensation, and they got something everyone could live with. Hermione simmered down. Ron breathed again, convinced he would have exploded if the noise had continued for a few more days. The Grangers left after dinner. Hermione lingered, still reluctant, and reminded Sherlock before she went to call or send a letter by owl. A few days passed and the date finally arrived, December 25th, 1991, Christmas. On that day, Mr. Granger's defiant prediction from a few days earlier came true. The so-called unbreakable alliance had collapsed in spectacular fashion, becoming a laughingstock on the international stage. It was, without exaggeration, the most far-reaching international event to affect the Muggle world since World War II. Whether it would have consequences in the magical world remained to be seen. For the students at Hogwarts, it was of little consequence anyway. Many didn't even know about it, and those who did had other priorities, namely what presents they'd found under their beds. When Harry, Ron, and Sherlock woke that morning, gifts were already waiting in their rooms. The wizarding world still relied on owls for delivery, and they'd done their work well. Sherlock stared silently at the tall stack of packages. He was surprised. So many people had sent him things. Surprise? Merry Christmas? Harry and Ron burst into Sherlock's room, evidently intending to spring a surprise. They stopped short when they saw the mountain of parcels and let out a double gasp. Sherlock, you actually got this many presents? Harry had been surprised himself when he found a neat pile of packages at the foot of his bed. Ron's pile, predictably, was larger. He had more relatives and friends than Harry. They decided to bring their gifts together and open them as a group, and now examined Sherlock's heap in astonishment. Ron pointed at a large, bulging paper package. That must be from my mum. You've learned to deduce by observation like Sherlock? Harry teased. I saw the same thing in your room, Ron said. She probably knitted one for each of you. Hermione must have got one too. They opened gifts. As Ron had predicted, Mrs. Weasley had knitted sweaters. Sherlock's was blue with a large S embroidered on the chest, Harry's green with an H, Ron's a magenta mess with an R. There was also a tin of homemade fudge, delicious. Hagrid had given each of them a hand-carved flute, rough but very solid. Hermione's gifts were apt and personal. For Harry, a box of horseshoe-shaped chocolates. For Ron, a huge box of every flavor beans. Sherlock's gift to Hermione, however, produced an audible reaction. Sherlock himself had received a book. Not the collectible cases of wizarding crime they had once discussed, but a slim volume titled charismatic speaking master. A note in neat cursive had been taped to the cover. Study hard. Sherlock opened the flyleaf and read a line written inside. This book offers exclusive techniques for communication, so that when you speak you astonish, and when you remain silent you are not noticed. Sherlock closed the book and said nothing. Harry and Ron stared. What did you give Hermione? Ron finally asked. It isn't a book, is it? Harry guessed. It is a book, Ron said. The title is Makeup for Beginners. They both gasped. Good heavens, Harry said. Why would you give Hermione that? Sherlock's gifts to them had been sensible. Wands are invaluable to Ron, and Wizard's chess was perfect for him. Why the sudden shift in style for Hermione? When giving gifts, you must consider practical needs, Sherlock replied flatly. Harry blinked. Do you think Hermione needs to learn makeup and dressing up? Evidently, Sherlock said. Harry and Ron exchanged looks. No wonder Hermione had exchanged the collectible law cases she'd been preparing. They let the matter drop. What was done was done. As they went on opening presents, they discovered why Sherlock had so many. Letters and cards slipped from envelopes revealed a string of private thanks. Dear Holmes, my heartfelt thanks for covering for me in Charms class. Your loyal Seamus Finnegan. To Holmes, thanks for recommending an excellent seeker. We'd be thrilled if you joined us, Oliver Wood. Sherlock, thank you for finding Trevor, Neville Longbottom. Holmes, thanks to you my father's name was cleared. Merry Christmas, Hannah Abbott and family. Mr. Holmes, thank you for solving my troubles, Cho Chang. Harry and Ron realized, with some surprise, just how many favors Sherlock had done quietly for other students. Sherlock, have you ever thought about being a detective? Harry asked. My childhood dream was to become a pirate, Sherlock said solemnly. Harry was speechless. Wait, what is a detective then? So the morning passed in slow, easy conversation. After lunch, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes went out for a walk, and the three friends stayed indoors. Harry and Ron resumed their wizard's chess. Ron, who was used to king-tier matches every day, welcomed even simpler games as a change. Sherlock, however, sat staring at the wall in a way that suggested he might have sat there all afternoon if no one had intervened. Hermione called. She spoke stiffly to Sherlock, saying that Mr. Granger had followed his advice and had borrowed some rubles from the bank. Given current conditions, he was sure to make a profit, though how big, small, medium, or large remained to be seen. Sherlock's answers were perfunctory. Hermione, irritated by his lack of response and the mystery of the gift, hung up. A moment later, she called back, chatting about the other presents she'd received. None perfect, but passable. Sherlock still showed no reaction. Hermione slammed the phone down in frustration. Sherlock stood and announced he was going out for a walk, insisting Harry and Ron stay behind. As soon as he left, Ron grumbled, "Sometimes Hermione's annoying too." Sherlock must have left because he didn't want to take any more of those calls. Evidently. Hey, don't talk like Sherlock. Did I? Evidently. You have the nerve to say that about me. They argued and bickered, then the phone rang again. Harry and Ron looked at one another and did what they always did when annoyed, ignored it. Hermione was persistent. Ron shook his head and elbowed Harry. Go on, old ha. I can't deal with this. Harry sighed, picked up the receiver, and the ringing stopped. Hermione, Sherlock's gone out. There was a pause. Then a voice, calm and sardonic, asked, Are you Harry Potter or Ron Weasley? Harry froze. Who is this? A quiet, amused chuckle answered. Me. I am the closest thing to a friend Sherlock Holmes could ever make. What does that mean? Harry demanded, glancing at Ron. He whispered and gestured. Ron understood at once and bolted out to look for Sherlock. The man on the phone continued as if nothing was odd. An enemy. At least, that's how he likes to think of me. Ask him and he'll probably say I'm his archenemy. He enjoys theatrics. Am I right, Mr. Harry Potter? How did you? Harry began. Holmes neglected to mention that moving around while you speak changes the sound of your voice, the man replied. And your friend's movements were a little loud. I could hear a door open and close from several feet away. Who are you? Harry's voice went tight. I told you, I am Sherlock Holmes's archenemy. So, are you planning to remain his friend? That's none of your business. That depends. The voice laughed again, full of interest. I'm calling to offer you a regular payment if you do me a small favor. What favor? Harry asked, suspicious and cold. Information, the man said simply. You won't be asked to intrude on his privacy or put yourself in danger. Just tell me what he's doing. Who are you, and why are you doing this? Harry asked for the third time. The man didn't answer the question directly. He worries me, you see. I like to know what he's doing. For reasons of my own, I want this kept quiet. No, Harry said flatly. I refuse. The man's tone brightened instead of hardening. Calm down, Mr. Potter. I haven't even mentioned how generous I'd be. That's irrelevant. I'm not interested. Sherlock is my friend. I won't help you. Do you trust no one but Sherlock Holmes? The man asked, amusement slicing his words. Harry's refusal didn't seem to perturb him. Or perhaps I should speak with Mr. Ron Weasley. I hear he could do with a bit of extra coin. I'm sure he'd be delighted to help me. 75. I am his enemy. Ever since that mysterious phone call, Harry had been on edge. He didn't know who had rung him, only that it was no ordinary person. Even without Sherlock's help, he could tell from the way the caller had deduced his identity and proclaimed himself Sherlock's nemesis that this was someone dangerous. Worse, the caller hadn't cared when Harry stated his position. He'd even said he would switch his attention to Ron. Harry had been frantic. Sherlock and Ron had gone off to find whoever had called, and Harry waited an hour before they finally returned. Seeing Sherlock perfectly composed and Ron panting, Harry was baffled. Weren't you going to find someone? How did you end up like this? He looked from Sherlock to Ron. You two. Mate, Ron panted. This time I'm actually impressed. To be able to exercise with this guy every morning, he added weakly. Sherlock gave Ron a cool glance. It was just a short jog. A jog? You call that a jog? Ron started to protest, but his words trailed off as he suddenly coughed twice and went bright red. Fine, whatever, I'm going to rest. He dragged his feet to his bedroom and collapsed onto the bed. Normally Harry would have followed to check on him, but today he didn't want Ron to overhear what he was about to say. He pulled Sherlock aside and dropped his voice. Why did you only come back now? Didn't Ron tell you? He said Hermione rang again and you asked me to come back quickly. I didn't think it was serious, so I took him for 2 laps, Sherlock replied. Harry bit back a string of curses and tried again. It wasn't Hermione. Someone who said he's your enemy called. Oh, which one? Sherlock asked, as if that was a simple question. Harry blinked. What? You have more than one? He said he's my nemesis, Harry said. Oh. Sherlock's interest was mild. Did he offer you money to keep an eye on me? Harry stared. Yes. Did you agree? No. Pity. You should have, then we could split it. Harry found himself lost in the rhythm of Sherlock's mind. He had to interrupt. Wait, who exactly is he? Sherlock answered almost conversationally. Someone who delights in pranks, someone who thinks he has lessons to teach me, and the most dangerous person I know. Harry stared. More dangerous than Lord Voldemort? In a way, yes. That was worse than anything he'd imagined. Harry told Sherlock everything. He described the call, the offers, and especially the part about the caller possibly turning his attention to Ron. Sherlock's expression barely changed. Tell Ron that if the man calls him, he should think carefully, Sherlock said. He can agree and split whatever it is. Harry gaped. Sherlock. Sherlock waved him off. Not now. We'll deal with arrangements once we return to school. What? Sherlock moved on, rattling off plans for when they went back. Explore the castle thoroughly, venture into the forbidden forest, and confront Quirrell. The list was practical. On the surface, it would train Harry and teach him the lay of the land. Deeper, Sherlock said, it would force Harry to understand the situation he'd been placed in. Sherlock explained more. Dumbledore, he said, had intended the boy who lived to face Voldemort directly because of the prophecy. Sherlock had confronted Dumbledore about it, arguing that if there was a real reason for Harry to face the Dark Lord, Harry should have been told the truth and allowed to choose, rather than being manipulated. It was a harsh argument, and Sherlock admitted he'd chosen his moment carefully. He'd analyzed how Dumbledore would react before speaking up. After thinking it over, Dumbledore had agreed with him. He hadn't retaliated against the critic, as Sherlock had expected. But Sherlock still believed Dumbledore was not telling them everything. He won't harm me, though? Harry asked. No, Sherlock said. There's no doubt about that. Then tell me what to do, Sherlock smiled. You listen and you act. That's useful, but we'll be specific when we're back at school. Only when Harry went up to his room did it hit him. He had meant to find out the caller's identity, and somehow the conversation had been shifted onto him. He felt both annoyed and embarrassed. Sherlock had once more outmaneuvered him. He also knew that if Sherlock didn't want to tell him, he wasn't going to get the answer. Yet not knowing kept him awake. The next day, Harry told Ron and Hermione everything. Hermione exploded. What? That mysterious person wants you and Ron to keep an eye on Sherlock. Why didn't he call me? She demanded. Because Ron and I share a dorm with Sherlock, Harry said. You should have called me, Hermione continued. I was the first to know Sherlock. Harry tried to stop her. Now's not the time. Why not? Hermione pressed. If the caller wanted surveillance, he should have thought of me. I know Sherlock better. Harry explained that Sherlock hadn't said who the caller was, only that Harry and Ron could accept and split whatever the offer was. Hermione's reaction was volcanic. She subjected them to a 15-minute earful and then hung up, still fuming. Ron, half amused and half exasperated, tried to calm things down. You two are worrying too much. If Sherlock says it's nothing big, maybe it isn't. But he also said this person is more dangerous than Voldemort, Harry began. Don't say that name, Ron snapped, then immediately backtracked with a sheepish string of apologies. He rolled his eyes. He thought the whole thing ridiculous. If some stranger genuinely offered money to spy on Sherlock, why not take it? If he's paying, split it and be done with it, the practical part of Ron thought. But they couldn't say that with things as they were. None of them expected what happened 3 days later. Hermione was due to visit. Mr. Granger had decided she was spending too much time at Sherlock's and had instructed restraint when Harry and Sherlock returned from their morning exercise to find a stranger at the flat door. He left a strong first impression. Tall, thick eyebrows, large expressive eyes, sharp features, and lithe energy, carrying a black umbrella at his side. He looked about 18 or 19, but there was a maturity about him that made him seem older. He smiled as they appeared. The great detective and his good friend have returned? I see your boxing practice went well today. Mr. Potter only fell once. Every hair on Harry's arms prickled. That voice, low, casual, unmistakable, was the same voice that had haunted his dreams for 3 days. Sherlock, Harry blurted, the certainty in him, like a physical thing. It's him, the man I told you about. Seeing the man and hearing Harry's words, Sherlock was not surprised in the least. I knew it was him. Under Harry's astonished gaze, Sherlock strode up to the man. Looking at that familiar, slightly alien face, he asked bluntly, "What are you doing here?" "Just as always," the man replied, "looking out for you." "Thanks. I think I've received your concern." Even without a height advantage, Sherlock's manner did not falter. He still had to look up at the other man when he spoke. "You're still the same, so officious. Have you never thought we're on the same side?" "That's odd." Mycroft tilted his head, considering, then answered plainly, "No. We have more in common than you imagine. Compared to that, our personal squabbles are childish." Sherlock's eyes sharpened at once. "Who is worrying them? Me? You need to understand. They never worried about me, Mycroft." Harry blurted. "Wait, stop. Just stop for a moment." He stepped forward and put himself between the two. He looked from Sherlock to the man Sherlock called Mycroft and asked carefully, "You said parents. Whose parents?" "My mother and father." Both brothers turned their heads at once, their matching raised eyebrows making Harry instinctively take a half step back. Sherlock suddenly chuckled. "Harry, this is my brother, Mycroft Holmes," he added with a boyish sneer. "He has put on weight again." Mycroft frowned. "On the contrary, I'm putting on muscle." He expected Sherlock to see through him. Clearly, he had said it to provoke. Harry could hardly believe it. "Brother? You said brother? He's really your brother?" "Of course he's my brother." Sherlock sounded impatient, his tone roughening. "But he's not." "Not what?" "I don't know how to say it." Harry hesitated, then blurted, "The mastermind?" Sherlock laughed aloud, delighted. "Well said, my friend, almost." Mycroft laughed too, but it was full of weary amusement. "Oh, please, I'm just an ordinary university student." "By ordinary, you mean you were working for the British government before you even graduated?" Sherlock said coldly, turning to Harry and not bothering to hide his sarcasm. If he hadn't been doing odd jobs on the side, he'd probably have been in the civil service straight out of university. The exchange left Harry stunned. He had never expected the man who'd claimed to be Sherlock's nemesis to be his brother, or that the brother sounded so formidable. The two of them bickered fiercely on the doorstep, neither willing to yield, and Harry, trapped between them, felt small and helpless. The door hinge creaked, and Mrs. Holmes pushed the door open, peering out. "Children, are you arguing?" "No. Impossible," they answered in unison, then both frowned. They stepped back 3 paces to create distance. Sherlock withdrew his hand quickly. Mycroft adjusted his tie casually. "Tea and refreshments are in the study." Mycroft pointed his umbrella at the mud print on Harry's shoe heel. "Tell Coach Moran his non-slip wax needs updating. Unless he wants to train all his players as geologists, it's not every day you manage to collect a sandstone sample from a fall." As he turned, the hem of his coat brushed Sherlock's trousers. "Keep up, brother, unless you want me to tell Mother you dismantled her Victorian samovar again." Sherlock ground his teeth and sneered. "Harry, never bet against bureaucrats like him. They even track how many raisins you ate for breakfast." Mr. and Mrs. Holmes were plainly pleased to have their eldest son home. From Mr. Holmes's introductions, Harry and Ron learned with surprise that Sherlock was not an only child. Mycroft was 7 years older, and the Holmes family had been country squires for generations. When Sherlock was 4, the family had moved to Montpellier, France, for 2 years, where Mrs. Holmes learned to cook French food. "What, so we've been eating French food all this time?" Ron asked, surprised. "The best restaurants in Britain are French restaurants," Mycroft said with a faint smile, fiddling with his black umbrella as he looked at Ron. Ron felt foolish. He'd always just eaten and never paid attention to such things. "After France, we went to Rotterdam, then lived in Cologne for a while," Mycroft continued, taking over the narrative from Mr. Holmes. "When Sherlock was 7, he went to a boarding school for the aristocracy, and we also hired a private tutor. Boxing, fencing, violin, he learned all those then. I have to say, my dear brother was remarkably talented." Sherlock snorted while Harry and Ron exchanged glances. Only now did they realize how varied their friend's life had been. At 7, he'd already lived in France, the Netherlands, and Germany. Compare that with their own lives. One bullied by a cousin in a cupboard, the other watching his brothers play Quidditch from the sidelines. "We are different. Last year Sherlock fell seriously ill," Mycroft went on. "We planned to send him to Yorkshire to the preparatory school as a day pupil after his recovery, but then he got an acceptance letter from Hogwarts. You know the rest." After a pause, Ron asked, "So, Mr. Mycroft, are you a wizard too?" Mycroft smiled at him. "What do you think?" Mycroft did not stay long, only one meal and he was gone. He said he was very busy. Harry and Ron couldn't understand. What could a 19-year-old university student be so busy with? Shouldn't that be the most relaxed time of life? "You don't need to worry about him," Sherlock said indifferently when they asked. "He's always been like that." "Sherlock, your relationship with your brother doesn't seem good." "He's got his own set of rules. He wants me to live a so-called normal life, which I refuse. You know I always crave freedom and excitement." "Then is he a wizard or not?" "Of course not." "Did your aunt and uncle tell him you went to Hogwarts and about me and Ron?" Sherlock's expression became complicated. "No, never." "Then how did he?" "Maybe you won't believe this, but he's better than me at observation and deduction." Sherlock said it calmly. Harry and Ron were stunned. They knew Sherlock's abilities well, but now he was saying his brother was even better? "Harry, do you remember earlier outside the house? When he first saw us, he said we'd been practicing boxing and that you had fallen." Harry suddenly remembered, distracted earlier by Mycroft's voice. "Isn't that something your mother—" He felt foolish again. Mrs. Holmes might have seen them out for morning exercise, but she couldn't possibly know about boxing practice or Harry's fall. "Of course not," Sherlock said. "First, our clothes were loose athletic wear and trainers, clearly not a leisurely stroll. Second, there was a slight red mark on my wrist from a boxing glove strap. He even noticed the direction of the wristband buckle, something I only realized later. And you, Harry, had your sleeve rolled up at the elbow with a few coarse fibers sticking to grains of quartz sand. Only the boxing gym in the alley behind St. Bartholomew's Hospital uses that mixed gravel surface. That's why he mentioned Coach Moran." The wear on your left shoe heel is odd, with a clump of mud on the outer side. Such a spiral pattern only forms when you drag your foot after losing balance. Combined with your stiff walk, it indicates a slight sprain from falling. Finally, the sweat on the back of your neck, unwiped, and your breathing rate, about 0.3 of a second faster than normal, point to sustained exercise for at least half an hour. From those details, he could deduce the whole scene. Harry and Ron were left speechless. "It's laughable," Sherlock added with a wry laugh. "When I got my acceptance letter last summer, I thought it was a prank by him. Turns out I was wrong." He didn't tell them the rest. Mycroft's behavior today left him with a vague, unsettling thought that Mycroft might already know about the existence of magic, perhaps even earlier than Sherlock himself. 77. Hermione, you never asked me. The first snow of 1992 came later than usual. The day before term started, Sherlock and his friends met again at platform 9 Equois, snow swirling around them. After saying goodbye to their families, the four of them climbed aboard the Hogwarts Express as they had when term ended half a month ago. The warmth of the train made the windows fog, and the pages of Hermione's potions book, Magical Drafts and Potions, fluttered at an unnaturally rapid pace. Ron's attention was fixed on a chocolate frog that had rolled under the seat and was tracing a zigzag path along Harry's sneaker. From the moment they boarded, Harry and Ron had noticed Hermione was not herself. She seemed to have argued with her father, Mr. Granger. She had been sullen and withdrawn, reading obsessively, refusing to speak. Sherlock had already worked out what had happened, but he didn't much care. Harry and Ron exchanged a look and decided not to prod. Sometimes it's best to let things lie. Of course, trouble has a habit of finding you when you don't go looking for it. Hermione shut the book with a snap that made the carriage quiet. "Sherlock, you never told me you had an older brother." Her long brown hair trembled as if some temper charm had been cast. She was furious that she'd been denied a meeting with Mycroft. She had spent days refusing to speak to Mr. Granger because he had stopped her going to Sherlock's house. Harry tried to smooth things over. "Hermione, even if Mr. Granger had allowed you to come, you might not have seen Mycroft that day. Bad move." The moment Harry opened his mouth, Hermione sneered and swiveled on him. "That's not the point. Why didn't you call me that day? I told you last time." Harry froze. Ron chuckled quietly to himself. He'd learned his lesson from past indiscretions. The Weasley brood had taught him that temper is a woman's patent and unreasonable fits are their privilege. He was enjoying the little moral victory when Hermione turned on him too. "And you, Ronald, I told you as well. Why didn't you remind Harry to call me? Do you think his mistake reflects well on you?" Ron's face fell. It was like being accused of being Hermione Granger or Severus Snape. Sherlock, who had been using the magnifying glass Harry had given him to examine the crack patterns in the ice on the window as if the argument were background noise, finally put the glass away at Hermione's direct stare. "Sherlock, aren't you going to say anything?" Hermione demanded. He folded the magnifying glass and said mildly, "Hermione, you never asked me." Harry and Ron exchanged a thumb up under the table. Sherlock had closed the conversation with a single, implacable sentence. Hermione, already bristling, tried to recover. "Even so, you could have called me along. We're friends." Sherlock leaned back, hands braced beneath his chin. "I don't think meeting that fellow was anything to encourage." "But he's your brother. He had Harry and Ron watching out for you. He was apparently worried about you. That is simply wishful thinking. For someone who constantly worries his parents, it's better to solve his own problems before taking care of his younger brother," Sherlock added. That shut the matter. Hermione thought the disagreement between the two brothers sounded childish, but seeing Sherlock's expression, she could imagine how awkward Christmas dinner must have been. It was family business, and there wasn't much she could say without overstepping. She shot Harry and Ron a glare that said plainly, "This is not our fault." Once the subject of Mycroft was dropped, the conversation flowed again. Harry, in a generous mood, handed round a pile of magical sweets. Aside from Ron, the others gathered rather a lot of wizard cards. Ron didn't care. He already had nearly 500 cards and was only missing 2 ultra-rare SSR cards, Agrippa and Ptolemy. He had long since given up hope of finding them, and was more interested in the chocolate frogs. Sure enough, the one that had rolled earlier was now his. By the time the train pulled into Hogsmeade, it was dark, and the Highland snow had thinned to a hush. Not all the students had returned, so the castle was quieter than usual. The Weasley twins were already waiting, and after greeting Harry and the others, immediately descended on Ron. "Little Ronnie, half a term away and your face has gotten rounder. The Holmes family feeds you too well. It's heartbreaking, accepting a friend's invitation and abandoning your own brothers. A collapse of public morals, a perversion of human nature." Poor Ron was helpless. He struggled as Fred and George dragged him off in a headlock. He caught sight of Percy passing nearby and yelled for help, only to watch Percy stride on as if he hadn't noticed. Percy was prudish and self-important and had been humiliated by the twins more than once. He'd tried and failed to discipline them before and had no appetite to intervene now. When he saw Ron getting the same treatment he'd once received, he felt a small, guilty satisfaction. Finally, he was not the only one suffering. Seamus, bored from arriving early, pulled Harry away for a new wizard chess set, and the two of them left the others behind. That left Sherlock and Hermione alone. Hermione suggested a walk. Sherlock agreed. It was a chance to plan the evening. The castle and grounds were beautiful under the snow and the moonlight. Silver blue light made the snow glow. The firs at the edge of the forbidden forest sagged under their laden branches like trees under a gentle levitation charm. The fresh snow was 3 inches deep. Each step gave a crisp, satisfying crunch. Hermione looked down at the neat staggered tracks she and Sherlock were leaving and felt something warm and oddly private stir in her chest. "Oh, by the way," she said, halting and stopping in mid-step, "I looked up some information over the holidays, and I think I finally understand the whole story about that business." Sherlock kept walking, as if he hadn't heard. Hermione raised her voice. "Sherlock, I'm talking to you." He sighed and turned. "Sorry. What did you say?" She took a breath and poured it out. "The Philosopher's Stone can turn any metal into pure gold and create the elixir of life, which grants immortality. The only existing stone belongs to the famous alchemist Mr. Nicholas Flamel. As Dumbledore's friend and associate, he was right to ask Dumbledore to help protect the stone. Quirrell, or rather Lord Voldemort, let the troll loose on Christmas to distract everyone so he could get to the vault where the stone is kept. His attack on Harry during the Quidditch match was likely Voldemort's doing too. Voldemort fears Harry because of the prophecy." Sherlock listened and then allowed himself a small, approving smile. "Hermione, you truly have a gift for synthesis." She blushed slightly at the praise. "It is a grave error to theorize without data," Sherlock continued. "One begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of shaping theories to fit facts. That's why, to most, Snape seems more suspicious than Quirrell. I'm pleased you can extract key clues from information and bind them into a sound, logical whole." Hermione felt vindicated. "But you explained most of that at Hagrid's, and I only put it together now." Sherlock gave a characteristic, faintly patronizing compliment. "My dear friend, for a first attempt at deduction, you are already 3 Rons smarter than the goldfish at Scotland Yard. I have often pointed out to him the difference between seeing and observing. He has only truly applied it in one situation." Hermione, affronted, demanded, "What situation?" "He never mistakes a sugar quill for a normal quill, even though they look rather similar." Hermione scowled, then brightened. "I'm going to review my notes. See you tomorrow." She hurried back to the castle, smiling despite herself. She'd already made a judgment by observation. Sherlock clearly hadn't read the public speaking book she'd lent him. Sherlock lingered a few moments in the grounds and then returned to Gryffindor Tower. Harry and Seamus had already been playing several games of chess. During the holidays, Harry had learned a number of new strategies from Ron at Sherlock's flat, and he was putting them to use on Seamus, who found himself on the back foot. The enchanted pieces, which had muttered their displeasure at Harry before, were behaving far better now, which pleased both boys. After Seamus left, Sherlock and Harry went back to their dormitory. Ron, exhausted from the twins' torment, was already fast asleep. Neville and Dean's beds were empty. They hadn't returned yet. Sherlock said little and simply gestured for Harry to fetch the invisibility cloak. Harry knew what that meant. It was time for a night stroll through the castle. He felt a rush of excitement and an odd, thrilling freedom, as if something inside him had been unshackled. 78. Leave tonight. We're leaving tonight? Harry whispered. Students won't all be back until tomorrow night, and Filch's vigilance will be lower. It's the perfect opportunity. Harry agreed eagerly. Once he draped the invisibility cloak over himself and watched his body vanish, his excitement grew. He hesitated a moment before stepping closer and pulling the cloak a little wider. Sherlock, why don't you come under it too? The cloak his father had left him was broad enough for two. Walking like that would be awkward, but safer. Embarrassed as he was to admit it, Harry had once planned to try the cloak alone, a private right, since it had been his father's. But the thought made him feel selfish and petty. Sherlock had procured the cloak for him, and it would have been wrong to exclude him. He hadn't expected Sherlock to respond the way he did. From the moment I gave you the cloak, you should have used it to explore the school alone, Sherlock said. It would have helped our plans tonight. Harry blinked. So you think I should have gone on my own? Sherlock's voice was calm and confident. For now, put it on, don't speak, and walk in front. Harry began. Even without the cloak, I won't be discovered, Sherlock added. He refused so firmly that Harry had no choice but to agree, though his thoughts were in confusion. So the idea of Harry using the cloak by himself had merit after all? Ridiculous. Still, Harry followed Sherlock's instructions. Cloak over both of them, they slipped from the dormitory, down the stairs, through the common room, and out through the portrait hole. Who is it? Croaked the fat lady. There was no answer, but Harry's heart hammered. He kept silent and hurried down the corridor, not daring to look back. Sherlock, walking directly behind him, shook his head. Without the cloak, Harry would have been spotted the moment he left the common room. Even with it, Sherlock thought Harry's movements betrayed him. Fortunately, they had time. At the end of the corridor, Harry finally paused to catch his breath and choose a destination. Instinctively, he looked to consult Sherlock, and then realized the cloak covered him alone. Sherlock had vanished. Panic pricked at him. Sherlock! Sherlock! He whispered. No reply. He told himself he must have walked too fast and lost his friend. About to turn back, a firm hand landed on his shoulder, and a familiar voice murmured near his ear. Good evening, Harry. Sherlock! Harry turned, and there he was, leaning against the shadow of a stone pillar. Quiet, if you don't intend to attract anyone, Sherlock said. I thought you were. Harry trailed off, too embarrassed to finish. He hadn't kept an eye on Sherlock at all. Sherlock took 2 steps back and, with a small flourish, revealed a slender shard of glass that shimmered faintly. You stopped in front of the suit of armor a moment ago. The knight's knee plate warmed by 2 or 3 degrees. Your cloak doesn't stop heat transfer. Harry's eyes darted to a tiny prism fastened to the collar of Sherlock's robe, its refracted light forming a faint lattice across the corridor. You've mastered the disillusionment charm? He blurted. That's advanced. Sherlock gave a mild smile. You overestimate me, Harry. It's simpler. He flicked his fingers, and fine threads glowed like moonlit silk between them. Spider silk I bought in Diagon Alley. When arranged correctly, it bends the path of light, and when the invisibility cloak brushes it, the silk emits a clear C note. He stepped closer. Also, your breathing is about 17% faster than normal. Not that anyone else would notice, but you should try to calm down. If you can't decide where to go, I suggest the library first. It's a comfortable distance, roomy, and you know it. We shouldn't linger here. Harry accepted the suggestion without hesitation. The library at night felt darker, somehow thicker than by day. The stacks were restful in scent, but eerie in shadow. Harry lit an oil lamp and carried it through aisles of sleeping books, the small flame bobbing as if floating in the air. When they reached the restricted section at the back, the chill in the place tightened. Harry stepped carefully over the rope that marked the boundary and considered whether to take a volume down when Sherlock said beside him, If I were you, I wouldn't walk where you might leave footprints. Harry glanced down and then chose a path with fewer telltale marks. Throughout the night tour, Sherlock taught him more than he expected. With deft movements and a few simple charms, Sherlock slipped through the castle as if the night were made for him. Harry, hidden beneath the cloak, came within inches of being discovered by Filch several times. Filch was, fortunately, more lax than usual. Each time, Sherlock provided timely cover, and they slid by undetected. What irritated Harry was that he nearly became separated several times when it was Sherlock's turn to lead. Getting lost while invisible felt unbearably foolish. Meanwhile, Sherlock, even without seeing Harry, found him with unfailing accuracy. It was impressive. After a while, Sherlock reminded Harry of more stealthy habits, and seeing the hour grow late, began to steer them back toward the dormitory. He deliberately took a different route, and predictably, Harry lost him. Doorways and corridors multiplied. Harry turned wrong corners and wandered into empty rooms. Sherlock watched him with a touch of exasperation. Teaching the chosen one patience and precision was proving to be a long task. Perhaps it would be easier if he simply did everything himself. Then Harry's voice came from very close by. "Sherlock, are you there?" Sherlock quickened his steps and found Harry standing in an abandoned classroom. Tables and chairs lay in a tilting stack against the wall, and an overturned wastebasket cast a dull shadow. But what caught Harry's attention was a grand mirror, tall enough to touch the ceiling, framed in ornate gold and standing on clawed feet. Sherlock studied it a moment and said, "This mirror was moved here no more than 3 days ago, and it'll be moved again soon." "Tell me, how did you figure that out?" Harry asked, suddenly all ears. Harry wasn't the same boy who gave up too quickly. He knew a good deduction when he had one, and he loved, above all, to hear Sherlock explain how he arrived at it. A simple deduction. When Harry asked, Sherlock explained in his usual brisk, almost casual way. "There's no accumulated dust underfoot, and no stray footprints. The fresh scratches were made by dragging something heavy. The dust around the mirror's base has been disturbed in a clear outline. The rest of the room still has an even layer. Choosing a long unused classroom and setting the mirror down casually like this says it's a temporary storage spot. Someone expects to move it on soon." Harry, who had braced himself mentally for Sherlock's explanations, still admired him. "Sherlock, it's always like this. Once you explain it, everything's obvious. Before you do, I never see it." Sherlock chuckled. "Thank you, and do mind the time, if you plan to stay." To Sherlock's slight surprise, Harry shook his head. "Shall we go?" "Go? Aren't you going to look? It's late." Harry hesitated. "I have a bad feeling." He couldn't shake the sense that the mirror's appearance had been staged, placed here to wait for them. "Deduction is contagious, my dear friend," he added. Sherlock laughed. The sound was bright but low enough not to draw attention. Harry's anxiety remained. Sherlock, however, was certain someone had put the mirror intentionally for them to find. Very few people in Hogwarts had both the motive and the means. Sherlock's mind had already leapt to a conclusion about who and why. "We can't leave without interference," he said quietly. "What did you say?" "I'd bet a galleon that if we try to go now, we'll run into Filch or someone who'll turn us back." Harry's hand tightened on the invisibility cloak. Sherlock's words made the figure crouched in the shadows still slightly too. "If you don't believe me, try it." Curiosity won. Harry wanted to test the prediction. He slipped the cloak up and crept to the door. Sherlock watched, curious to see how the trap would be sprung. Harry eased the door open a crack and froze when a pair of bright feline eyes appeared, Madame Norris's. He held completely still, unsure whether an invisibility cloak hid cats. Fortunately, she only lingered a moment before turning away. Harry let the door shut with a long, relieved breath. "So it wasn't a person," he said sheepishly. Sherlock smiled a little and walked to the mirror. Sherlock's deduction had been borne out. Harry wasn't keen on trying the door again, so he followed. Sherlock stood in front of the glass and glanced up. A line of carved letters ran across the top. "Erest stra eru ube kafru oit on wosi." It looked like nonsense at first. Sherlock read it correctly in less than 3 seconds. Surprise flickered across his face, then thin amusement. Of course, he understood why the mirror had been placed here. He stepped forward. His fingers rested on his chin, the gray of his eyes pinpricked into cold light as they reflected the glass. The mirror did not show him a mound of galleons or Victorian London. It was a precise, unsettling tableau. Silver threads knotted into a net in an empty void, each thread threaded with pocket watches, blood-stained daggers, and yellowing case files. A parchment of strange symbols slowly unfurled, ink forming magical equations he did not recognize. Hogwarts itself hung in suspension, a dodecahedron whose faces were twisted into the same Gothic phrase, the final problem. Sherlock watched for a few long seconds and snorted. A sentimental projection. Show me the truly impossible, say, the moment I stop thinking. Harry joined him and, hearing that, frowned. Sherlock, what are you talking about? Sherlock pointed to the inscription. Harry read it again and, perplexed, let Sherlock answer. Erised stra eheroi ube kafru oit on wosi. Read it backwards and respace it. I show not your face but your heart's desire. Harry blinked. So it shows what you want most. Exactly. Sherlock's voice was quiet. This mirror reflects the deepest, most urgent desire of a person's heart. That powerful? Harry asked. What did you see? Sherlock stepped aside without answering. Haven't you always wanted to see your family? He asked instead, indicating the space in front of the glass. Harry's mouth opened. His hands trembled as he moved closer. The closer he came, the more his chest tightened. When the mirror finally filled his view, he almost cried out. Dozens of faces stood behind him, his parents, grandparents, strangers with the same green eyes and the same nose, even a grandfather with the same bumpy knees. He stared, rooted, and then, forgetting to listen to the world, pressed his hands to the frame as if he could touch them through the glass. Mom, he whispered. Dad? A firm hand gripped his shoulder and turned him away. Sherlock had taken him by force, wrenching Harry's gaze from the glass. Harry yelped, angry and stunned. What are you doing? Ouch. Sherlock held him steady. Calm down. I suppose you saw your parents. It wasn't just them. Grandma, Grandpa, so many. They all have my eyes, my nose. Granddad has the same knees. Oh, Sherlock. Words tumbled out incoherently. Sherlock looked at him with unexpected softness. Your longing for family is stronger than I imagined. Harry kept glancing back at the mirror, pleading. Sherlock frowned, then let go. He would allow the indulgence for a time. Harry flung himself back to the glass and sat on the floor in front of it. He wanted to stay there until dawn, living in that reflected crowd of family that smiled and waved and seemed to belong to him in a way the real world had never managed. He did not notice the footfalls until it was too late. Ah! The voice at the doorway stopped Harry's breath. He turned slowly. Professor Dumbledore stood framed in the doorway. His expression was kindly, entirely unshocked. Sherlock inclined his head. Professor, Dumbledore smiled at Sherlock. When I was your age, Mr. Holmes, I did not possess such acute powers of observation. He stepped into the room and regarded the mirror with a mixture of fondness and sadness. You are right. This glass shows people their deepest desires. It is called the Mirror of Erised. Relief washed over Harry when he saw that smile. Sherlock, unsurprised, raised an eyebrow. Dumbledore, still smiling, looked at Sherlock. So then, can you tell me, Mr. Holmes, what your heart's desire is? Sherlock had already worked out that Dumbledore had placed the mirror here. He answered at once, without theatrics. An overly poetic clockmaker, I'd say, and perhaps Mr. Filch should be advised to improve the castle's pest control. Dumbledore's smile deepened. Harry and the headmaster exchanged an amused glance. Sherlock drove on. Reality and fantasy blur more easily here than elsewhere, especially in a world with magic. I don't think leaving this mirror in an accessible place is wise. Dumbledore inclined his head. He had meant to say much of this to Harry himself. He seemed relieved someone else had put it plainly. Turning his attention to Harry, he spoke gently. Harry. Professor, Harry answered, flustered. I prefer Professor, Dumbledore corrected with an amused lift of his eyebrows. Dumbledore addressed them both seriously. The mirror will teach you nothing in the way of lessons or answers you can act on. People have wasted days before this glass, becoming obsessed, even driven mad. Things shown are not necessarily attainable. If one becomes lost in illusion, real life suffers. Harry remembered, with shame, how he'd pressed himself to the frame. He recalled how Sherlock had stopped him. To forget the present for a dream is no benefit, Dumbledore continued. I shall have the mirror moved elsewhere. I trust you will not seek it out. Sherlock looked at him. Very perceptive. Will you take it away now? Quite so, Dumbledore said. He gave Harry a small, knowing smile, then turned his head to Sherlock. And you? What did you see in the mirror? Sherlock met his gaze. You came up with this one, I presume. Very poetic. He stepped back, expression neutral. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. I saw myself, holding a pair of thick woolen socks. Sherlock's face softened into something like incredulous amusement. Harry could only stare. Dumbledore ignored their surprise and adopted a gentler tone. Go back to bed now. Mr. Potter, wrap yourself in that remarkable invisibility cloak and be sensible. Harry nodded, grateful. Sherlock added slowly, one does not strictly need an invisibility cloak to be invisible. Is that not so? Dumbledore simply smiled benevolently and, after a few more quiet words, left them to go. Under Sherlock's calm guidance, their walk back was quicker than the way there. They did not bother with any pretend stealth once they were safely moving away. When they reached the Gryffindor common room, Harry exhaled in relief. Thank goodness. I thought Professor would deduct points. He won't. Sherlock's voice was certain. How do you know? Because he isn't Professor Snape. His tone went unexpectedly serious. My friend, your performance tonight was not good. Harry's cheeks warmed. He felt suddenly ashamed. In front of the mirror, he had let himself be taken over by an overwhelming, selfish longing. He had thought, however briefly, that if he could just be with that reflected family, nothing else mattered. Not Quirrell, not the Philosopher's Stone, not Voldemort. He had almost let the enemy who had taken his parents slip into the background of his thoughts. He could feel Sherlock's disapproval like a cold wind, and it sobered him faster than any reprimand could. 80. Faster, higher, stronger. Sherlock, I was wrong. I shouldn't have indulged in fantasies. Harry was mortified. He had no idea what had come over him earlier. If Lord Voldemort really obtained the Philosopher's Stone and regained his strength, trouble would surely follow. Whether Voldemort would try to reassert control over the British wizarding world was one question. What terrified Harry most was the prophecy. If it came to that, Voldemort would never let him go. He couldn't believe he'd treated the danger so carelessly. He had been possessed. The line between fantasy and reality isn't always clear, Sherlock said, and not everyone can tell them apart, especially at your age. Harry blinked at him. Then Sherlock offered a piece of news that brightened him considerably. There are many ways to miss your family, he said, but losing yourself in fantasy is the worst. This summer, we'll go to where your parents lived. Harry lit up. Before that, you'll have to teach me stealth and fencing properly. Okay, he agreed with absolute confidence. As long as I'm with Sherlock, I'm not afraid of anything. After a few more words from Sherlock and Dumbledore, Harry finally let go of thoughts about the Mirror of Erised and fell asleep. Sherlock, however, remained thoughtful. Dumbledore had clearly placed the mirror in that abandoned classroom to draw them there, not out of malice, but to observe them, to study character. The old man wanted genuinely to nurture a savior. As for Sherlock, well, Dumbledore might mean no harm, but he liked to keep everything under his control. That habit was obvious the time he tried to have Harry face Voldemort alone. When Sherlock had been a child, looking into the mirror might have shown him sailing off to sea. Now it would show eternal mysteries, endless deductions. He enjoyed it. He was not a normal person. Whether Dumbledore could understand him was another matter. When term resumed, Harry set the mirror aside and trained with Sherlock every day. Sherlock intended to teach boxing and fencing, but given Harry's earlier malnourished condition, he first needed to rebuild his body and master the basics. Sherlock started by increasing the intensity of Harry's morning exercises, early rising, brisk walks, and jogs around the Black Lake. The lake offered fresh air and scenery, and walking and running there improved coordination and endurance. After aerobics, they did simple stretches on the flat grass to increase flexibility, perfect for someone who had been undernourished and out of practice. After classes, once the other students were asleep, Sherlock would slip Harry out of the common room, and they would weave past Filch, Madame Norris, and Peeves to continue their nightly explorations of the castle. The excursions were never long, sleep mattered, but they were thrilling. With the invisibility cloak and Sherlock's guidance, Harry improved quickly and admired him more each day. It was worth noting that Sherlock did not keep the cloak on him the whole time. Even without it, he nearly avoided detection by Madame Norris several times. Sherlock remained steady, unflappable, perhaps a gift for him. Under Sherlock's subtle guidance, Harry completed a wide, if not exhaustive, tour of Hogwarts, aside from the forbidden forest and the corridor Dumbledore had explicitly warned them about. The school had too many secrets. Beyond the visible corridors lay hidden passages known only to Filch and the Weasley twins. Still, after weeks of training, Harry's outlook changed. His scrawny frame filled out and became better proportioned. He was no longer the smallest in the group. He became faster, taller, stronger. The professors who had received Christmas gifts returned the favor. Snape in particular was worth mentioning. He gave Harry a bottle of an expensive, practical advanced potion. It altered Harry's view of Snape somewhat. But Snape did not change his behavior in lessons. He still deducted points from Harry whenever he pleased, with no leniency for gifts. By now, even the little lions were used to it. Everyone knew that when potions class was on, Gryffindor tended to lose points. Time slipped by. Just as Sherlock prepared to increase the intensity of Harry's training again, Quidditch practice resumed, and the plan had to be postponed. Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor captain, refused to ease up. He was strict with everyone, even during the rainy stretch after heavy snow. Fred and George Weasley complained that Wood had become a training fanatic. Harry, however, supported Wood. If they won the next match against Hufflepuff, they could beat Slytherin for top House Cup points, Gryffindor's first big victory in 7 years. Besides, after Sherlock's training, Quidditch practice felt easy to him. Wood praised Harry for it. The Weasley twins, however, were their usual undisciplined selves, diving and bombing, sometimes pretending to fall off their brooms for laughs. "If you two keep messing around," Wood snapped, exasperated, "we'll lose the match. And Snape's the referee this time. He'll look for any excuse to dock Gryffindor points." At the mention of Snape refereeing, the twins' faces fell, and, as if fate had a sense of humor, they promptly fell off their brooms and landed face first. The news that Snape would referee the Quidditch match set the Gryffindor team buzzing after practice. The players clustered and argued enthusiastically. Harry ran off without a word. He wanted to tell his friends. In the common room, Ron was playing wizard chess with Hermione. It was one of those rare moments when Hermione let Ron win, or at least allowed him to pretend he had. Both of them were absorbed, one wanting to win, the other enjoying seeing his opponent lose. Harry leaned in and lowered his voice to tell them that Snape had volunteered to referee. "Don't play," Hermione said immediately. "Fake a broken leg. Break it for real," Ron added without a second thought. "I can't," Harry said. "We don't have a backup seeker. If I pull out, Gryffindor can't play." He told them that Sherlock had said Snape wasn't completely bad, how he had protected Harry in a previous match and had even returned something of his. Harry only then noticed Sherlock wasn't in the common room. Since Quidditch had started, Sherlock had stopped the nightly explorations, so Harry could get enough sleep. He still did the morning exercises, but with slightly reduced intensity. During the day, Sherlock often sat in the common room doing his homework, much to Hermione's annoyance. Every time he finished, Ron would leave his work out for others to copy. Sherlock said nothing. Hermione scolded him for indulging everyone. If it hadn't been for the troll incident, she would have objected openly. Still, the little lions grumbled in private. Sometimes Sherlock's homework couldn't be copied. He simply didn't do the subjects he didn't care about, or left only an answer. In those cases, Harry and Ron had to rely on Hermione. She refused to let people copy, but she would check their work and guide them to the correct answers. "Watson sent a letter," Ron said when Harry asked where Sherlock was. "Hagrid wants him to come to the hut. We were wondering whether we should go too after you arrived," Hermione added. Harry wondered what Hagrid could want with Sherlock. Had a magical creature gone missing? While he was thinking, Neville stumbled into the common room and landed awkwardly. Harry rushed over instantly. "That's a leg locker curse," Hermione whispered, and stepped forward to break it. Harry helped Neville to his feet. Ron, Dean, and Seamus, close friends of Neville's, swarmed around in concern. "My bloody hell, what happened?" Sherlock, unaware of the commotion back in the common room, sat in Hagrid's hut, sipping the giant's specially brewed strong tea. In winter, it was more effective than a warming charm. It chased away the cold, eased fatigue, and sharpened the spirits. The only downside was frequent trips to the loo. "Thank you, Hagrid," Sherlock said. Hagrid looked flustered, not quite sure how to begin. He sighed and plunged in. I'll be straight. There are three ways to solve the predicament you're facing right now.